Chapter 1990. Sizzle. After the sword essence entered Gong Sun Sheng's body, it made a strange sound, as if a piece of red-hot steel had been put into cold water. Gong Sun Sheng seemed to have sensed something. His body trembled violently. Forbidden blood seeped out of the wound caused by the sword will and circulated in the air, releasing a very strong sword will aura. Tian couldn't help but be taken aback upon seeing this. The sword essence, which was not very strong, had forced the forbidden blood seal out of Gong Sun Sheng's body. Ha ha ha! Ha ha! Suddenly, Gong Sun Sheng laughed crazily. I was right. Your sword essence can really resist the forbidden blood seal. I'm saved. I'm saved. Tian and Guiwu Guangsha were stunned. They looked at each other in shock and speechlessness. Gong Sun Sheng was known as the #1 swordsman in the 9 major realms. His current performance did not match his reputation. Divine Sword Master, what's going on? Why can my sword essence force out the forbidden blood seal? After a while, when Gong Sun Sheng calmed down, Tian asked in confusion. He could feel that the sword essence had a strong suppressive effect on the forbidden blood seal. Otherwise, it would not have been able to force it out of Gong Sun Sheng's body. Tian had a vague feeling that there was a very familiar aura in the forbidden blood seal. He seemed to have felt this aura before, but he could not remember where. I don't know why. Gong Sun Sheng calmed down a lot, and he could not hide the excitement on his face. He said, when you took the sword stone test, I could see that your sword essence had a strong suppressive effect on the sword stone runes. Otherwise, with your strength, you would not have been able to leave a 1,000-meter mark on the divine martial sword stone. The sword stone test? Tian was stunned for a moment before his eyes lit up. He immediately thought of something and came to a sudden realization. No wonder I felt a familiar aura from the forbidden blood seal. It turns out that the aura of the forbidden blood seal is very similar to that of the rune on the sword stone. The divine martial sword stone was covered in strange runes, and the aura of those runes was extremely similar to the forbidden blood seal. When Tian had first tested the sword stone, he had felt that his sword intent seemed to have caused great damage to the sword stone runes, which was why he was able to leave a 1,000-meter long sword mark on the sword stone. The aura of the forbidden blood seal and the sword stone rune were very similar, so there should be a close connection between the two. Gong Sun Sheng knew what Tian was confused about, so he said with a frown, the forbidden sword technique I cultivate is the runes on the divine martial sword stone. Tian was stunned for a moment, and the doubt on his face deepened. The runes on the divine martial sword stone were very strange. Not even Fat Cat could recognize them. So how could Gong Sun Sheng possibly recognize them? A long time ago, an extraordinary person appeared in the divine martial sword pagoda. He was the one who comprehended the runes on the divine martial sword stone and wrote down the forbidden sword art according to the runes. He was the first person to cultivate the forbidden sword art, but because he couldn't control the forbidden sword intent, he went berserk and self-destructed. Gong Sun Sheng explained solemnly when he saw Tian's confusion. I see. Tian nodded. He had already understood everything. The reason why Gong Sun Sheng tried so hard to rope Tian was because he could see that Tian's sword intent could resist the forbidden blood seal. To Gong Sun Shengji, Tian was his last hope. However, there were too many forbidden blood seals in Gong Sun Sheng's body. With Tian's current strength, it was impossible for him to force them all out. In order to save Gong Sun Sheng, Tian had to awaken more God Fiend power. Only then could he have a stronger God Fiend sword intent. The God Fiend sword intent was formed by combining the God Fiend power with other sword intents. Tian had sufficient sword intent in his body, but he lacked the God Fiend power. Currently, Tian had awakened 256 strands of God Fiend power in his body. That was far from enough. Looks like I need to increase my strength if I want to save Gong Sun Sheng, Tian thought with a frown. Tian, you won't just watch me die, will you? Gong Sun Sheng could not help but ask as his eyes flickered when he saw Tian's lack of response. Of course not. Tian smiled faintly. Sir Divine Sword Master, I really want to save you, but I'm too weak right now. I need to increase my strength to Overgod first. Increase your strength to Overgod? Gong Sun Sheng was stunned. His expression immediately became extremely ugly. Overgod was a bottleneck for any cultivator. Even the most monstrous cultivator would need 100 years to become an Overgod. Gong Sun Sheng was already in danger, so he had no time to wait. Don't worry, Sir Divine Swordmaster. If nothing goes wrong, I'll be able to become an Overgod by tomorrow morning. Nietian obviously knew what Gong Sun Sheng was thinking, so he smiled faintly. Gong Sun Sheng and Guiwu Kuangsha were stunned at the same time. They immediately became speechless. Looking at Nietian's reaction, it seemed like becoming an Overgod was a common occurrence to him, something that could be done easily. Sir Divine Swordmaster, take me to a safe place now. I can't be disturbed tonight. Nietian did not explain too much and just nodded slightly. Gong Sun Sheng agreed, before taking Nietian and Guiwu Kuangsha to a hidden place in the inner courtyard of the city lord's estate. Nietian took a look and immediately remembered that this was where Gong Sun Sheng had gone into seclusion. Nietian, go in. I and Brother Guiwu will guard you, Gong Sun Sheng said as he retreated out of the courtyard with Guiwu Kuangsha. Nietian glanced at the two of them, then entered the room. Gong Sun Sheng and Guiwu Kuangsha were both experts at the peak of the Way of the Sword. With the two of them guarding Nietian at the same time, it was obviously foolproof and guaranteed that Nietian would not be disturbed in any way. Fat, come out. In the room, Nietian willed the Hellfire Crucible to appear with the Heart of Darkness within it. Nietian removed the Hellfire Crucible, exposing the Heart of Darkness to the space. Immediately, the room was enveloped by a powerful aura of darkness. Nietian, are you ready? Fat Cat's figure immediately appeared, looking at Nietian with a fiery gaze. Nietian nodded, then sat down cross-legged and said, "Let's begin." "All right." Fat Cat agreed, took a deep breath, and began to move his hands. Glazed energy surged out of his palms, transforming into strange runes that circulated in the air. The entire room was filled with 7-colored light, dazzling and dazzling. A moment later, a spell formation appeared, and the mysterious power of the spell formation slowly surged out, slowly approaching the Heart of Darkness. "Get ready, we're about to begin," Fat Cat growled. The Heart of Darkness sensed something, and a black beam of light appeared, shooting towards Nietian. The black beam of light shot directly into Nietian's body, and the endless power of darkness surged into him like a broken dam. Chapter 1991. The Heart of Darkness was one of the 3 bodies of the Dark Abyss Source Energy. It contained a terrifyingly huge amount of dark energy. This kind of huge energy had an enormous impact on Nietian's body. The instant the dark energy surged into his body, Nietian felt as if an enormous beast had rushed into his body, colliding with his limbs and meridians, nearly tearing his body apart. Even though Nietian had endured a terrifying pain before, at this moment, he was unable to bear the impact of the Heart of Darkness. He couldn't help but scream, "Nietian, you must endure it." Fat Cat couldn't help revealing a worried expression as he saw Nietian's body distort and his handsome face become hideous and terrifying. He was very sure that Nietian's demonic yuan was enough to fuse with the Heart of Darkness, but he wasn't sure what kind of effect it would have on Nietian after fusing with the Heart of Darkness. Nietian had already fused with the Earth Source Energy before, but the Darkness Source Energy was far more powerful than the Earth Source Energy. Moreover, the Earth Source Energy was relatively gentle and didn't have much of an impact on a martial artist's body. However, the Darkness Source Energy was extremely aggressive and had a strong impact on a martial artist's body. The Origin Energy was originally a terrifying power. There were very few martial artists that could fuse with the Origin Energy, and there had never been anyone that could fuse with 2 Origin Energy at the same time. In Fat Cat's memories, there had never been anyone that could fuse with 2 Origin Energy at the same time. If Nietian succeeded in fusing with the Heart of Darkness today, he would become the first person to fuse with 2 Origin Energy. Nietian endured the enormous pain, but his eyes were still firm, without the slightest hesitation. Outside the small courtyard, Gong Sun Sheng and Gui Wu Kuang Sha couldn't help but become worried when they heard Nie Tian's screams. "Brother Gui Wu, what is Nie Tian doing? Why do I feel a terrifying dark aura?" Gong Sun Sheng looked at the small courtyard, faintly sensing a dark aura. He couldn't help but ask with trembling eyes. Gui Wu Kuang Sha shook his head, not saying anything. No matter what Nie Tian did, he believed that Nie Tian would succeed. Gong Sun Sheng was extremely anxious because his life was linked to Nie Tian's. If something happened to Nie Tian, he wouldn't be able to live either. After a long while, the courtyard finally calmed down. Nie Tian's screams gradually became softer, but that terrifying dark aura was still there. It had become even more intense. In the room, Fat Cat looked at Nie Tian, who had calmed down. The corner of her mouth curled up slightly as she murmured, "Everything is going well." Next, we'll see what will happen after Nie Tian completely integrates with the Heart of Darkness. The Heart of Darkness constantly released a dark energy that flowed into Nie Tian's body where it was absorbed by his demon essence. At this time, Nie Tian's mana was in a very strange state. It was surging with a violent dark aura, as if it would explode at any time. At the same time, Nie Tian's aura skyrocketed as he circulated his demon yuan. After who knew how long, Nie Tian suddenly felt a profound power appear in his body. It was streaks of white light that circulated through his meridians and blood, fusing with his martial body. The power of laws. Fat Cat suddenly sensed something, and her eyes could not help but waver. Afterwards, she became overjoyed. The power of laws had appeared in Nie Tian's body. This meant that he had successfully broken through to Overgod. What powerful power of laws! Fat Cat was shocked when he sensed the presence in Nie Tian's body. This was the most powerful power of laws he had ever seen. The power of laws was the symbol of an overgod, but this power was normally not used in battle. Instead, it constantly grew stronger as the cultivator's cultivation increased. Once a cultivator reached the peak of overgod, the overgod laws would produce the power of the ways, helping the cultivator reach overgod. Even though the overgod laws were not used in battle, there were still differences in strength. Usually, the more powerful the overgod laws were, the greater the cultivator's talent, and the greater their accomplishments in the future. The Fat Cat had seen countless laws of overgods before, but it had never seen the laws of a cultivator who had just become an overgod possess such great power. Nie Tian's talent had exceeded Fat Cat's expectations. At this moment, the Heart of Darkness was still constantly releasing the power of darkness. It surged into Nie Tian's body madly, causing his presence to grow stronger and stronger. The Heart of Darkness really is powerful. Fat Cat could not help but cry out when he sensed that Nie Tian's presence was still skyrocketing. Arg! However, right at this moment, Nie Tian suddenly let out a blood-curdling scream. Immediately after, a terrifying wave of dark aura erupted from his body, directly exploding in all directions. The sudden attack caught Fat Cat off guard. Before he could even react, he was sent flying. Rumble. In the next moment, there was a huge explosion, and the entire room directly exploded. The terrifying power of formations and runes appeared in the air, turning into surging waves of air that wreaked havoc in the space. This was the place where Gong Sun Sheng cultivated in seclusion, and it was surrounded by a powerful sword formation. Even a peak overgod cultivator would not be able to break through the sword formation. How could Nie Tian's body explode with such terrifying power? He could directly break through the protective sword formation. What's going on? Gong Sun Sheng and Gui Wu Kuang Sha, who had been guarding outside, cried out at the same time. Gong Sun Sheng knew better than anyone how terrifying the protective sword formation was. He could not believe that Nie Tian could so easily break through it. Bang! At this moment, a figure suddenly broke through the broken sword formation and appeared in front of Gong Sun Sheng and Gui Wu Kuang Sha. Nie Tian. Gong Sun Sheng and Gui Wu Kuang Sha were stunned. The person who appeared in front of them was none other than Nietion. But at this moment, Nietion's aura was completely different from before. His whole body was surging with a terrifying dark aura, and his silver hair was flying in the air. He looked ruthless and austere, like a wild beast that had gone berserk. What a strong killing intent! Gong Sun Sheng and Guiwu Quang Sha could feel the extremely bloody, killing intent in the space around them. They couldn't help but tremble and exclaim at the same time. Both of them had experienced countless life and death situations, but they had never seen such a terrifying killing intent. At this moment, Nietion was like a killing vortex, constantly releasing a strong killing intent, causing the entire space to become silent and austere. What's going on? Gong Sun Sheng could feel that something was wrong, and his voice couldn't help but tremble. In the past, Nietion was also a ruthless person, but he was definitely not a cruel and bloodthirsty person. At this moment, his whole aura was only filled with killing intent, and it was a completely pure killing intent, as if he wanted to kill everyone. This kind of killing intent was too terrifying, and it made people shiver from the bottom of their hearts. Nietion is out of control. At this time, Fat Cat's voice sounded, and he looked very flustered. He stared closely at Nietion's eyes, and his face was extremely shocked. Chapter 1992. What's going on? Didn't Nietion go to increase his strength? Why did he suddenly lose control? Suddenly hearing that Nietion had lost control, Gong Sun Sheng's face suddenly changed, and he said with a trembling voice, Nietion's life and death was related to his life and death, so he was naturally very nervous. Don't think so much. Stop Nietion. Fat Cat shouted and roared at Gong Sun Sheng and Guiwu Quang Sha. He also didn't know why Nietion suddenly lost control, but the most important thing now was to stop Nietion first. Okay, Guiwu Quang Sha replied, and his figure moved. Sword intent gushed out of his whole body, turning into a net of sword intent, and enveloped Nietion. He didn't dare to hurt Nietion, and could only think of a way to control the latter. Roar! Nietion's black eyes flickered, and a beast-like roar came from his throat and directly punched out. Suddenly, a terrifying black fist shadow whizzed out, and the sword intent net in the air directly collapsed. How is this possible? Guiwu Quang Sha's figure flickered and avoided the fist shadow, but his face was incomparably shocked. He suddenly discovered that Nietion's strength had soared by several times and could actually easily break his sword intent. It was really too strange. His strength has increased. You must go all out. Fat Cat saw this and shouted to remind. At this moment, Fat Cat already felt that the power of gods and demons in Nietion's body had unexpectedly awakened. The origin embryo of gods and demons, the power of 9,000 gods and demons, had all awakened. This was the reason why Nietion's strength had soared. It was precisely because of this that Nietion could easily break the protective sword array. Fat Cat couldn't understand how Nietion could suddenly awaken the power of 9,000 gods and demons. This was too strange. The power of gods and demons had all awakened, and it caused a huge impact on Nietion's divine sense, causing him to directly lose control. Boom! Just at this moment, Nietion suddenly sent a fist rumbling out. Instantly, a fist shadow akin to a mountain came crashing down towards the ghost Marshall Wild Sand. What a powerful aura! Guiwu Quang Sha felt a frightening power pressing down on him. His eyes couldn't help but tremble as he cried out in alarm. His reaction was very fast. He directly stabbed out with his sword, and a huge sword shadow appeared, blocking the huge fist shadow in the air. Despite this, Guiwu Quang Sha was still forced to retreat, to the point that he was almost unable to stand. It had only been a casual fist strike, but Nietion had sent the peak paramount god Ghost Warrior Wild Sand tumbling backward. His battle prowess is terrifying, Ghost Warrior Wild Sand said, his eyes trembling. Even more terrifying than a peak paramount god. Thankfully, Ghost Warrior Wild Sands was far stronger than an ordinary peak paramount god. Otherwise, Even if Nietian couldn't kill him, he would definitely have been seriously injured. Nietian's combat prowess was too frightening, far exceeding the expectations of the ghost Martial Wild Sand. "Brother Ghost Warrior, stand down. Let me handle this." Gongsun Shengji's voice rang out. He stabbed out with his sword, and a majestic sword shadow appeared, blotting out the sky and covering the earth as it pressed down on Nietian. Instantly, a terrifying sword pressure spread out, and the remaining talismans in the sword formation around Nietian were directly shattered. Even the ground beneath his feet was cracked. Gongsun Shengji was worthy of being called the #1 swordsman in the 9 realms. His sword strike was several times more powerful than Guiwu Quangsha's. More importantly, his control of sword will had reached the acme of perfection. Although this sword strike looked terrifying, it wouldn't cause too much damage to Nietian. Its main purpose was to keep Nietian under control. Nietian felt the enormous sword pressure coming from above his head. He suddenly raised his head, and a hideous look appeared in his eyes. Then he punched out. His fist was extremely powerful, and the shadow of his fist soared into the sky, crashing against the protective sword formation. Fortunately, there was a huge protective sword formation here. Otherwise, everything within tens of thousands of meters would have been destroyed in an instant. Rumble! The enormous sword shadow fell from the sky like a waterfall, swallowing the fist shadow in an instant. Then it turned into a boundless pressure that came crashing down. Bang! In the blink of an eye, Nietian erupted with a terrifying sword aura. He looked like a giant, standing up to the sky and resisting the boundless pressure in the air. A huge shockwave that could be seen with the naked eye spread out in the sky, violently bombarding the guardian sword formation in the surroundings, causing the entire formation to shake. When the divine martial sword pagoda was first established, countless powerful swordsmen had poured a great deal of effort into it, and it could withstand the attacks of peak paramount gods. But now, as Nietian and Gongsun Shengji fought, the sword formation was under a severe test. How was this possible? How could Nietian become so strong in the blink of an eye? Gongsun Shengji's eyes were trembling. He could actually sense that there was an extremely violent and terrifying power surging inside of Nietian. He had never encountered such a terrifying power before. It struck fear into his heart. Crap! At this time, little fat cat, who had been observing from the side, suddenly let out a loud cry of shock. He suddenly realized that Nietian was emanating blood energy. The power of 9,000 gods and devils was awakening at the same time, and Nietian's body couldn't handle it. His blood energy was leaking out of control. At this rate, it wouldn't be long before Nietian ran out of blood energy and died. Fat old man, you must control Nietian. Little fat cat realized this, and its face changed as it shouted in fear. The fat old man he was referring to was none other than Gongsun Shengji. Gongsun Shengji roared, and his sword will surged out like a broken dam, transforming into boundless sword pressure that bore down on Nietian. This time, Gongsun Shengji's sword pressure was many times stronger than before. Even a peak paramount god wouldn't be able to come out of it unscathed. Boom! All of a sudden, the ground under Nietian's feet sank, and the ground in a radius of tens of meters cracked and crumbled, raising a layer of soil. Roar! However, right at this moment, Nietian let out another furious roar. His abyss-like black pupils actually faintly emitted a dark red color, as if he was a wild beast that had been completely enraged. In the next moment, Nietian's blood aura burst forth even more violently. Instantly, the sword aura around him surged madly, soaring into the sky like a gigantic sword that could split the heavens. Suddenly, Gongsun Shengji sensed something, and his eyes trembled. Not good. Bang! Even as the words left his mouth, the sword image in the air couldn't be maintained any longer and shattered. Gongsun Shengji was hit by the impact and couldn't help but stagger back a few hundred meters. He wasn't injured, but his face was filled with shock. He never imagined that Nietian would be able to break through his suppression. Just now, Gongsun Sheng had already gained the upper hand. The fact that Nie Tian had been able to break through the sword pressure under such circumstances proved that his battle prowess was beyond imagination. Chapter 1993. Watch out! Seeing Nie Tian's figure soaring into the sky, Guiwu Kuang Sha couldn't help but cry out. He saw that Nie Tian was charging towards Gongsun Shengji. Gongsun Shengji reacted instantly. His eyes trembled, but he didn't dare to use his full strength. A long sword appeared in his hand, and he slashed through the air. Endless sword will turned into a spherical shield, protecting him in the middle. At this time, Nie Tian's figure flew over, his whole body surging with a terrible dark aura. He was like a demon from hell, desperately attacking Gongsun Shengji. At this moment, he had completely lost control of his mind, and only the desire to kill was controlling him. Bang! 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 Endless roars sounded. Nie Tian seemed to have gone mad, and he kept attacking Gongsun Shengji. Even though Gongsun Shengji had the protection of the sword shield, he was gradually feeling the pressure from these terrible attacks. At this time, Fat Cat was extremely anxious. Of course, he wasn't worried about whether Gongsun Shengji could resist Nie Tian's attacks, but he was worried that Nie Tian wouldn't be able to hold on any longer. Nie Tian was so powerful that even a peak expert like Gongsun Shengji couldn't control him. On one hand, it was because he had awakened the power of 9,000 demons, and on the other hand, it was because he was constantly burning his blood chi. Blood chi represented a warrior's life force. Once it was burned out, the warrior would die completely. Nie Tian's blood chi was very vigorous, but it couldn't withstand this kind of endless burning. Fortunately, he had the earth source energy and the source of the earth vein in his body. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to hold on for so long. What should I do? What should I do? I must find a way to make Nie Tian become cold. Fat Cat shouted in his heart, but he really couldn't do anything now. According to Nie Tian's current battle strength, it would probably take a saint to easily control him. Unfortunately, there were no sages in the 9 major domains. Nie Tian's blood chi is unceasingly decreasing, and his life aura is starting to weaken. Ghost Marshal Kuang Sha had also sensed something and shouted loudly in alarm. Damn it! Fat Cat cursed. Then, she hardened her heart and shouted, Fat old man, don't hold back. Go all out. Gongsun Sheng was afraid of hurting Nie Tian, so he had been holding back. He only defended and did not attack, but this only made Nie Tian more and more crazy. Their only chance now was to let Gongsun Sheng attack with all his might, hoping that he could subdue Nie Tian. Hearing Fat Cat's words, Gongsun Shengji was stunned. Then he saw Nie Tian's ferocious and terrifying face. He made up his mind, and all the sword will in his body surged. Suddenly, the mighty sword will spread out like a flood, directly pushing Nie Tian back a few steps. However, Nie Tian was in a berserk state. With a furious roar, he charged forward once more. Nie Tian, I'm sorry. Gongsun Sheng's eyes darkened, and he no longer held back. He swung his sword, and immediately a 10,000-meter-long blur appeared in the air. It was like a terrifying bolt of lightning, illuminating the night sky. This! Ghost Marshal Kuang Sha could not help but shudder when he saw this. He was extremely shocked. He could obviously sense just how terrifying Gongsun Sheng's attack was. Gongsun Sheng was a legendary swordsman. Coupled with his cultivation as a peak over god, his full-powered attack was enough to destroy a mountain range. If the attack landed on Ghost Marshal Kuang Sha, he would definitely be heavily injured even if he did not die. Right now, Nie Tian only possessed the strength of an early overgod. Would he still be able to survive if the attack landed on him? However, in the next moment, Gongsun Sheng was completely stunned by the scene that unfolded before him. Roar! Nie Tian showed no fear in the face of Gongsun Sheng's full-powered attack. Instead, he let out a wild roar, and a vast draconic aura surged out of his body. It fused with the dark aura around him and condensed into a 1,000-meter-long black dragon. Roar! The black dragon surged into the sky, and an earth-shattering roar resounded through the sky. In that instant, the sky changed color and the world trembled. A dragon and a sword wreaked havoc in the night sky, causing it to seem desolate and desolate. Rumble. In the next moment, the black dragon and the blur of the sword finally collided. Time and space suddenly froze, as if time had stopped. The feeling of time and space stopping only lasted for an instant before a terrifying wave of air exploded. Immediately, the draconic aura and sword intent intertwined, clashing, devouring, and penetrating each other. Ghost Marshal Quang Sha felt the terrifying wave of air sweep over, and he was actually forced back several thousand meters. He was a peak over god, yet he was actually unable to endure the wave of air. It was obvious just how powerful the clash between Nie Tian and Gong Sun Sheng was. After a long while, the wave of air gradually dispersed, and two figures appeared. They were Nie Tian and Gong Sun Sheng. When Guiwu Quang Sha was able to clearly see the figures of the two people, the shock and astonishment within his heart reached its peak. Gong Sun Sheng stood in midair, his body trembling uncontrollably. Blood trickled down the corner of his mouth, and his face was as pale as a sheet of white paper. He was like a withered leaf in a gale, about to fall at any moment. On the other hand, Nie Tian's face was vicious, and his eyes were vicious. He stared at Gong Sun Sheng like a god of death. T lost. Ghost Marshal Quang Sha was stunned for a few seconds before he responded. He said blankly, without a doubt, Gong Sun Sheng had lost this head-on clash, and he had lost very miserably. Gong Sun Sheng, the master of the divine martial sword pagoda and the greatest swordsman of the 9 major regions, had actually lost. Moreover, he had lost to Nie Tian, who had just become an overgod. Ghost Marshal Quang Sha was unable to accept this. If he had not seen it with his own eyes, he definitely would not have believed it. The outcome before him had completely surpassed his understanding of the martial way. Just what power was hidden within Nie Tian's body that could actually allow him to defeat a peak expert like Gong Sun Sheng as an early overgod? At this moment, Fat Cat was also completely stunned. Nie Tian's strength had exceeded his imagination. He could tell that Nie Tian had only fused the power of 9,000 demons and gods with the power of the dragon Qi in his body, and that was enough to heavily injure Gong Sun Sheng. Fortunately, Nie Tian was currently unconscious. If he had used the sword intent of the demons and gods, he would definitely have killed Gong Sun Sheng instantly. Fat Cat's eyes trembled. Apart from shock, there was even more panic on his face. Gong Sun Sheng had been defeated by Nie Tian. Who could stop Nie Tian now? Ghost Marshal Quang Sha? That was impossible. Roar! At that moment, Nie Tian let out a low roar like a wild beast and blurred into motion, morphing into a fierce sword shadow that shot towards Gong Sun Sheng. Not good. Seeing this scene, little Fat Cat's expression changed, and it cried out in shock. Gong Sun Sheng had already been heavily injured by Nie Tian. If he took another direct attack from Nie Tian, he would definitely die. Gong Sun Sheng was the master of the divine sword and the greatest swordsman of the 9 major regions. It would be too ridiculous if he were to die by Nie Tian's hands. Nie Tian, stop! At this critical moment, a familiar voice suddenly rang out in the night sky. Share! Fat Cat had only heard the voice. He had not seen the figure, but he already knew the identity of the newcomer. It was Cher. After confirming that it was Cher, Fat Cat's eyes flickered with a strange light. Chapter 1994. In the night sky, Nie Tian's figure was murderous, like a sharp blade of the night, striking towards Gong Sun Sheng. However, at this moment, Nie Tian suddenly heard a special voice. His chaotic divine sense suddenly trembled and actually became clear for a moment. His figure also paused for a moment. His eyes became empty, and his expression was incomparably painful. Nie Tian, it's really you. Immediately, a black-clothed figure appeared, standing in midair. It was Cher. Cher saw Nie Tian, and first spoke with surprise, but when she clearly saw Nie Tian's expression, her whole body couldn't help but tremble. She had never seen a person with such an expression of pain. Nie Tian stood dumbfounded and the violent aura around his body slowly dissipated. How is this possible? The sudden scene caused Fat Cat to be stunned. He knew that Cher was extremely likely to make Niet Tian become cold, but he didn't expect it to be so easy. It seemed that Cher had only just stood there, and Niet Tian instantly calmed down. What's wrong with him? Cher hadn't figured out the situation and suddenly noticed Fat Cat and asked cold. You quickly talked to him. Fat Cat reacted and was extremely excited, afraid that Niet Tian would become violent again, and hurriedly said, Say what? I don't know him. Cher was stunned for a moment and replied cold. Fat Cat was also stunned for a moment and didn't know how to answer Cher. However, he had already discovered that after Cher's appearance, it seemed to have aroused a mysterious power in Niet Tian's body, and it was this power that made the originally violent Niet Tian calm down. Gong Sun Sheng and Gui Wu Kuang Sha looked at the scene in front of them, and their expressions couldn't help but tremble. In order to control Niet Tian, the two of them almost lost their lives. However, as soon as Cher appeared and said a few words, Niet Tian became cold. This was too strange. The two of them recalled that Niet Tian had spoken to Cher during the swordsman tournament. It seemed that the two of them really knew each other. When Fat Cat saw that Niet Tian became cold, he was no longer in a hurry. He tried to sense the change in Niet Tian's aura, and could clearly feel that mysterious power slowly surging within Niet Tian's body. It's so strange. Why is there a kind of power in his body that feels so familiar? Cher suddenly said in puzzlement. When Fat Cat heard Cher's words, he couldn't help but stare blankly for a moment. Then, he quickly reacted and said with a mischievous smile, No wonder Niet Tian can calm down. It's because of the tear of the princess in his body. Cher's words made Fat Cat immediately understand that the mysterious power circulating within Niet Tian's body was the power of the tear of the princess. The tear of the princess was originally given to Niet Tian by Cher, so she naturally felt that it was familiar. Fat Cat speculated that the reason why the tear of the princess could take effect at this time was also because of Cher's arrival. Little girl, why are you here? When Fat Cat saw that Niet Tian's aura was slowly returning to normal, he no longer paid attention to him. Instead, he looked at Cher and asked. This was the Divine Martial City's city lord residence, and it was also in the inner courtyard. Even if the battle between Niet Tian and Gong Sun Sheng was very loud, it didn't alarm many people. Cher's sudden appearance was very strange. I don't know either. It seems like there's a force guiding me here. Cher shook her head. She also didn't know why she suddenly came here. Perhaps it was a feeling in her heart that led her to come here. It seems like the tear of the princess is taking effect. Fat Cat's lips curled into a faint smile as she guessed. Cher's sudden appearance was definitely not without reason. The only explanation was the tear of the princess. Perhaps the tear of the princess wanted to protect Niet Tian, so it led Cher here. Little cat, what's wrong with Niet Tian? Cher didn't know what Fat Cat was thinking, but she couldn't help but ask again when she saw that Niet Tian didn't say anything. Moreover, his eyes were also empty and lifeless. He's fine. He'll be fine soon. Fat Cat could feel that the god fiend aura in Niet Tian's body was constantly weakening, and he said with a faint smile. Hearing Fat Cat's words, Cher didn't say anything else. Her memory was sealed, and her personality had changed. She was much colder than before, especially when facing strangers. At this moment, she was wearing the Underworld Emperor's sacred robe, which didn't match her temperament at all. Why did Niet Tian want to kill you just now? Then, Cher looked at Gong Sun Xingji and asked in puzzlement. She had never seen Gong Sun Xingji before, so she didn't know the latter's identity. Gong Sun Xingji's complexion improved a little. Hearing Cher's words, he couldn't help but smile bitterly and said, Actually, it's nothing. I was just sparring with Niet Tian. Sparring? Cher was stunned for a moment. Then, she said in a cold tone, With your strength, you actually sparred with him. Isn't that a bit too much? Gong Sun Xingji was stunned for a moment. Then, he smiled bitterly and shook his head, saying nothing. Cher was late, so she didn't see the scene where Gong Sun Xingji was severely injured by Niet Tian. If she had seen that scene, she would have known that the one who was being bullied was not Nie Tian, but Gong's son Shengji. I'm leaving. Cher glanced at Nie Tian. She didn't want to stay any longer. She said coldly and turned to leave. Shui Cher. Just as Shui it took a step forward, Nie Tian suddenly looked up. His eyes, which were as deep as two abysses, gradually became clear again. Looking at Shui with a confused expression, he asked, "What are you doing here?" Cher turned around and saw that Nie Tian's complexion had returned to normal. She couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Then, she asked, "Why can't I be here?" At this time, Nie Tian had completely returned to normal, but he had no memory of what had happened just now. Nie Tian looked at Fat Cat helplessly, but the latter shook her head and didn't say anything. Fat Cat didn't want Nie Tian to know what had happened just now, because it would affect his mentality. Nie Tian was stunned by Cher's question. Then, he frowned and said, "Cher, do you really not remember me at all?" Cher looked at Nie Tian. She seemed to be hesitating and wanted to say something. In fact, she wanted to tell Nie Tian that she had a feeling of déjà vu. But before she could say it, she was interrupted by a sudden voice. "Your Highness, it's time for us to go back." A faint voice sounded, as if it came from hell. Only the voice could be heard, but the person was nowhere to be seen. Hearing this voice, Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. A name appeared in his mind. Earth Leader. The voice that suddenly sounded in the void was not unfamiliar to Nie Tian. It was the voice of Earth Leader, one of the heaven and earth leaders of the nets above, snares below. As expected, Cher didn't come to the Evil Peak sword competition alone. The person who accompanied her was Earth Leader. Chapter 1995. Who's there? Come out. Gongsun Shengji and Guiwu Quang Sha growled at the same time when they heard a voice suddenly ring out. They were extremely cautious, as they had not discovered the existence of anyone in the air. Earth Quang's concealment was very impressive, allowing him to escape the senses of Gongsun Shengji and Guiwu Quang Sha perfectly. In reality, probably no one would have discovered Earth Quang Sha's existence if he had not shown himself. "Your Highness, let's go." Earth Quang Sha did not seem to be willing to show himself. He completely ignored Gongsun Shengji and Guiwu Quang Sha as he spoke to Cher again. Gongsun Shengji and Guiwu Quang Sha both wanted Earth Quang Sha to stay, but they did not even know where he was, so they could only watch on anxiously. "Sir Earth Quang Sha, since you're already here, why don't you show yourself?" Nie Tian's voice rang out at this moment. He said rather playfully. He knew long ago that there was an important figure from the inescapable net following Cher, and he wanted to meet him very much. Now that he heard Earth Quang Sha's voice, he obviously did not want to let him go just like that. Nie Tian wanted to know why the inescapable net had allowed Cher to participate in the Evil Peak sword competition. More importantly, he wanted to know how he could make Cher recover her memories. Gongsun Shengji and Guiwu Quang Sha were both stunned when they heard Nie Tian speak. They had never thought that the latter would actually know Earth Quang Sha. The space fell silent for a while before Earth Quang Sha's voice rang out a while later. He said, "Nie Tian, you really haven't disappointed me. In less than 2 years, you've actually reached early over God. You've really surprised me." The last time Nie Tian had seen Earth Quang Sha was in the God shepherding domain. Back then, Nie Tian was only a lesser god, yet in less than 2 years, he had grown from a lesser god to an overgod. It was no wonder that Earth Quang Sha would be so surprised with such a terrifying rate of advancement. "Sir Earth Quang, I don't need you to remind me about my strength. Since you're already here, please show yourself." Nie Tian smiled faintly. He secretly activated the holographic divine glyphs and carefully sensed Earth Quang Sha's presence. "Nie Tian, I know what you're thinking." Earth Quang Sha's voice rang out once more. Earth Chief's voice sounded again. "You don't have to worry. I'll come find you after the Evil Peak sword competition is over about the princess. Right now, you should focus on the Evil Edge sword discourse." As the cold voice faded, the void returned to silence. There was not the slightest movement. "I'm leaving," Snow said, then turned around and left. Nie Tian didn't stop her. He could only watch helplessly as her figure gradually disappeared into the distance. Nye Tian couldn't hide his disappointment that he hadn't been able to force Earth Chief out. Tian, 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 Nye and Nye Tian, 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 Tian is Tian, Tian time. Tian, 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 Tian are out. I'm fine. Nye Tian smiled faintly. He had no recollection of his sudden loss of control, but he could tell from Fat Cat's expression that something must have happened when he was merging with the heart of darkness. Fatty, what happened? Nye Tian swept his gaze across the messy courtyard and asked with a frown. It's nothing. It's just a small accident. It's good that you're fine. The Fat Cat chuckled. Soon after, her body moved and she returned to the Yuan fetus space. Nye Tian. At this time, Gongsun Xingji and Guiwu Guangsha had also arrived at Nye Tian's side. Seeing that the latter had already returned to normal, they were extremely happy. Nye Tian saw that the two were in a sorry state, especially Gongsun Xingji, who seemed to be heavily injured. He couldn't help but ask, Divine Sword Master, who injured you? He was very curious, just who was so powerful that they could seriously injure Gongsun Xingji. Ahem, that I'm fine. Gongsun Xingji coughed twice and said with a bitter smile. How can Nye Tian know that the person who injured Gongsun Xingji was none other than himself? Nye Tian, who was that person just now? Guiwu Guangsha looked at Nye Tian and couldn't help but ask. That person's aura is very special. He was actually able to completely conceal himself in front of me. His strength is definitely not below mine. Gongsun Xingji followed up, unable to conceal the surprise in his eyes. Nye Tian didn't hide anything and said in a deep voice, He is the Earth Chief of the Nets and Nets above. Earth Chief. Hearing Nye Tian's words, Gongsun Xingji and Guiwu Guangsha were stunned at the same time and cried out. In fact, the two had already vaguely guessed it when they heard how Nye Tian addressed that person. But when they heard it from Nye Tian's own mouth, they still felt shocked. Why would someone from the Nets and Nets above appear here? Gongsun Xingji calmed down slightly and said with a surprised expression. From his point of view, the Evil Edge Sword competition, this time, was getting stranger and stranger. First, it was the Xianyuan family that had been hidden from the world for hundreds of thousands of years. Then, it was the swordsmen of the Holy Parliament. Now, even the Nets and Nets above had appeared. Gongsun Xingji truly felt that it was inconceivable. These powers might have never appeared in the Evil Edge Sword competition in the past. I'm afraid that the Nets and Nets above aren't here for the Evil Edge Sword competition, but for me. Nye Tian bitterly smiled and didn't say these words out loud. As far as I know, the Earth Chief is the supreme existence of the Nets and Nets above. But he addressed that black-clothed woman as Her Highness, and his tone was very respectful. I'm very curious. Who is that black-clothed woman? And what is her status in the Nets and Nets above? Guiwu Guangsha frowned and voiced out the doubts in his heart. Nye Tian faintly smiled and said, That girl is called Cher, and she's a friend of mine. But I'm not sure what relationship she has with the Nets and Nets above. Gongsun Xingji and Guiwu Guangsha glanced at each other and nodded at the same time. The two of them were not idiots. They could obviously tell that the relationship between Nye Tian and Cher was clearly not as simple as just friends. However, since Nye Tian was unwilling to say more, they naturally could not force him. Sir Divine Sword Master, Sir Guiwu, let's stop here for today. My strength has only just risen to over God, so I need some time to familiarize myself with it. I'll be taking my leave first. Nye Tian was concerned about his current strength, so he did not stay any longer. He directly left after saying that. Gongsun Xingji and Guiwu Guangsha watched as Nye Tian disappeared. Their expressions were extremely complicated. What happened tonight had a great impact on them. Even now, they still felt like they were in a dream. When Nye Tian lost control, the power that erupted from his body was just too terrifying. It was unimaginable and unbelievable. Gongsun Xingji and Guiwu Guangsha's evaluation of Nye Tian had always been very high, but now they knew that Nye Tian's terror had far exceeded their expectations. Chapter 1996. Within a room in the courtyard of the city lord's estate. I've finally become an overgod, and yet Tion murmured, unable to contain his excitement. After fusing with the heart of darkness, he had finally become an overgod. Naturally, he was overjoyed. Early overgods and peak high gods seemed like they were only separated by a single minor level, but the difference between them was like the difference between the heavens and the earth. Overgods produced overgod laws within their bodies. Although this power wasn't particularly impressive in battle, it was a huge improvement to a cultivator's martial body. It was a qualitative leap for a cultivator. Becoming an overgod was even more significant for Tion. His current battle prowess was countless times greater than before. After becoming an overgod, Tion's various abilities had experienced a qualitative improvement. The Nine Extremities War God art had originally been stuck at the 6th Division, the Extreme Wind Firmament Realm. Now, it had risen to the 7th, the Extreme Lightning Violet Sky Realm. Although it was only a single level of improvement, Tion's defense and offense had skyrocketed several times over. Another important factor was that Tion's Origin Star Stone had opened up to the 8th of the 9 galaxies. He had awakened the power of 800 billion stars. Not only did the awakening of the power of the stars strengthen Tion's martial body, but it also greatly increased the abilities he had obtained from the Origin Star Stone. However, to Tion's dismay, there was nothing else in the 8th galaxy apart from the power of the stars. When the previous 7 galaxies had opened, a heaven-defying ability had appeared, but there was nothing in the 8th galaxy. Tion found it strange. However, he had come across a similar situation before. When the 4th galaxy had appeared, the Starry Sky ancient martial art had also appeared. Tion suspected that there must be a close connection between the 8th and 9th Starry Rivers. Only by opening the 9th Starry River would he be able to gain new abilities. Unfortunately, he had no idea how long it would take for him to reach the paramount god level before he could open the 9th planetary river. Tion, do you feel anything strange now? At this time, Little Fat Cat's voice sounded, asking very cautiously. No. Tion shook his head. He was confused. He had no idea why Fat Cat would ask such a question. That's good. Fat Cat snickered. He did not say anything else, but he felt extremely confused inside. He was still wondering why Tion had suddenly awakened 9,000 strands of power. The darkness of the heart of darkness must have impacted the sea of gods and demons, causing the power to awaken instantly, Fat Cat guessed. Tion had completely recovered now. After becoming an overgod, he had awakened 512 strands of power. It was exactly what his martial body could endure. The might of 9,000 gods and devils awakening at the same time was so great that even a powerful expert like Gongsun Xingji couldn't contend against it. Even someone as strong as Gongsun Xingji couldn't stand up to Tion when he became a peak paramount god. If Tion became a peak paramount god, he could unleash the power of 9,000 gods and devils at the same time and crush anyone under the level of sage. The fiend god nascent embryo truly lived up to its reputation as the #1 ancient taboo. I wonder if I can fight someone like Kanglin Sacred Sword now that I have the 3 forbidden arts. Tion muttered to himself, his eyes flashing with a sharp light. He was looking forward to fighting Kanglin's Sacred Sword. The next day, the Swordsman Tournament continued. It was the 3rd day of the Swordsman Tournament, and more than half of the 5,000 participants had been eliminated. There were only 2,000 left. Tion, Jian Jingyun, and Gue Wuchan appeared together. However, Jian Jingyun was seriously injured, so he could not participate in the rest of the tournament. Tion was in a good mood. He was looking forward to the next battle, as it would be his first since becoming an overgod. A moment later, the referee's voice rang out. Sword Arena 7, number 95 versus number 1770. When Tion heard the announcement, his lips curled up into a smile. Blurring into motion, he flew toward the Sword Arena 7 and landed on one of the stone pillars. As soon as Tion took the stage, he attracted a lot of attention. Even Gongsun Shengji and the others in the spectator stands looked over. Gongsun Shengji looked over at Nie Tian in surprise. Nie Tian had expended a lot of blood energy the previous night, but in just one night, he was back to his peak condition. Not long after Nie Tian landed, a black-garbed figure appeared and landed on the stone pillar in front of him. Not bad. The corners of Nie Tian's mouth curled up as he looked at the person in front of him. It was a black-garbed swordsman, an early paramount god, with an elementary level of sword and martial arts. At this moment, the swordsman was staring at Nie Tian with a venomous gaze, his body surging with undisguised, strong, killing intent. Nie Tian couldn't help but be stunned when he saw the other party's attitude. Then he smiled and said, "Do we have enmity?" The black-garbed swordsman's face darkened, and he said, "You brat, you killed my sect's second uncle. Do we have a grudge against each other?" "Sect's second uncle?" Nie Tian couldn't help but laugh. "You got the wrong person. I don't even know who your sect's second uncle is. Why would I kill him?" It was at this point that a familiar voice rang out from outside the sword arena. "Cut the crap, Liang Fei. Kill him for your master." Upon hearing the voice, Nie Tian turned and saw a familiar face. It was none other than Yang San, one of the three fierce beasts of the North Sea. As it turned out, Nie Tian's opponent was Liang Fei, who was Yang San's apprentice. Needless to say, the sect's second uncle Yang Fei was referring to as none other than Yang Lin, who had been killed by Nie Tian. Back when the three fierce beasts of the North Sea had provoked Lian Wui, Nie Tian had killed the second brother, Yang Lin, and the eldest brother, Yang Mu, had been killed by Xian Zongfeng. Only the third brother, Yang Sun, had been spared by Xian Zongfeng. Who could have guessed that Yang Sun would be so daring as to come back and let his apprentice participate in the wretched peak sword discourse? "Yang Sun, do you really think you can kill me?" Nie Tian looked at Yang Sun coldly, his eyes filled with disdain. Yang Sun had seen how strong Nie Tian was, and for him to send Liang Fei to kill Nie Tian would be like sending his apprentice to his death. "Cut the crap. Do you really think you're invincible?" Before Yang Sun could respond, Liang Fei let out a strange shriek, and his sword energy surged even more violently. The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched as he said with a cold smile, "I'm not invincible, but I am to you." Arrogant. Liang Fei's face grew cold as he let out a bellow. A slender, sharp sword appeared in his hand, and he directly thrust it towards Nie Tian. Instantly, a torrential sword intent surged out like the sea, condensing into a fierce sword shadow in the air, which slashed towards Nie Tian. Astral Soul Shield. Facing Liang Fei's fatal attack, Nie Tian merely smiled. He didn't dodge, nor did he retaliate. Instead, his body trembled as boundless astral energy gushed out from his body. In an instant, an astral soul shield appeared around Nie Tian, enveloping him. Chapter 1997. When Liang Fei saw that Nie Tian was only defending and not attacking, his killing intent surged. Bam! In the next moment, the sword shadow descended from the sky and landed directly on the starlight shield around Nie Tian. However, only a muffled sound was heard. The starlight shield wasn't damaged at all, while the sword shadow was shattered. "This is impossible." Liang Fei was stunned by the scene in front of him. He cried out in shock, his eyes filled with disbelief. He could sense that Nie Tian's defenses weren't very strong, and yet he had managed to block his sword attack without being hurt. It was completely bizarre. The eyes of the surrounding spectators were also shining, and they were quite surprised. They knew that Nie Tian was strong, but the fact that he was protected by a shield of starlight made it seem like it wasn't strong at all. It was very strange that he had been able to block Liang Fei's sword attack. After all, Liang Fei was an early paramount god in the sword, and a single sword strike from him could easily crush mountains. Although Nie Tian's shield wasn't very powerful, it was shockingly strong. How could anyone not be shocked? Furthermore, the power Nie Tian was using was so strange that no one present had ever seen anything like it. "Go on." Nie Tian looked at Liang Fei, a faint smile at the corner of his mouth, and said provocatively, "Where's your arrogance? If that's all you've got, you won't be able to hurt me." Liang Fei wasn't weak by any means, and he could prove that Nie Tian had gotten stronger. After reaching the Godlord level, Nie Tian's battle prowess had skyrocketed. Even without using his 3 forbidden skills, he could easily deal with an early paramount god. The biggest benefit Nie Tian had gained from becoming a godlord was that his martial body had become even stronger. That said, in his current state, he would still need to use his 3 forbidden skills to kill Liang Fei. "You're too arrogant, you brat." Liang Fei was already furious, but now that Nie Tian had provoked him, he let out a furious howl and unleashed his sword will, causing intense killing intent to fill the air. "Brat, go to hell." A malicious voice came out of Liang Fei's throat. Suddenly, a terrifying sword shadow came crashing down towards Nie Tian. Liang Fei had unleashed his most powerful attack, one that could kill an ordinary early paramount god on the spot. He didn't believe that Nie Tian, who was only at the early stage of deity realm, could block his sword. "You want to kill me so badly? Unfortunately, you're not worthy." Faced with Liang Fei's strongest attack, Nie Tian merely smiled cold. His eyes did not show fear, but disdain. "Purple lightning battle armor, activate." Nie Tian's eyes were as calm as still water. He still didn't attack. The starlight shield around his body circulated a layer of purple lightning power. It looked very strange. Bang! The next moment, the sword shadow fell, and a loud, muffled sound was heard. The result was the same as last time. The starlight shield was not damaged at all, and the sword shadow directly collapsed. This! Liang Fei's eyes widened in shock. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. He had used all his strength in that attack, but it still couldn't break through Nie Tian's defense. In other words, even if Nie Tian stood there without moving, he still wouldn't be able to kill Nie Tian. Liang Fei couldn't imagine how an overgod's martial body could be so strong. The surrounding spectators were also shocked. Only now did they realize that Nie Tian's defense was just as strong as his combat power. Nie Tian's strength was beyond everyone's imagination. "Trash!" At this moment, Yang Sen's voice rang out. He looked at Liang Fei with disgust and roared. Liang Fei's face turned red, and his eyes shone with even more killing intent. "Brat, I'll kill you!" Liang Fei roared. His sword intent surged again, and his blood chi surged. Liang Fei ignited his blood chi and broke through his limits. He had to kill Nie Tian. "Oomph!" Nie Tianling sneered, and his face turned cold. He said in a deep voice, "You still don't want to give up? Unfortunately, you don't have the chance." With that, Nie Tian's body surged with black inscriptions. One of the 3 forbidden skills, the Dragon Forbidden Talisman, was activated. The moment the talisman was activated, Nie Tian's aura surged. He stabbed out with his sword without hesitation. The sword shadow was extremely sharp. Liang Fei didn't even have time to react. His body was swallowed by the sword shadow, and he died on the spot. The sudden scene made everyone's eyes widen. After a moment of shock, they began to scream. Only now did everyone realize that Nie Tian was just playing with Liang Fei. He didn't show his strength at all. When Nie Tian was done playing, he killed Liang Fei with a casual swing of his sword. Nie Tian's strength had exceeded everyone's expectations. They were shocked and terrified. At this moment, several unfriendly gazes were also staring at Nie Tian. Beneath the ghost mask, a pair of grim eyes were fixed on Nie Tian, cold and vicious. This person was none other than the ghost mask swordsman that Nie Tian had been paying attention to. On the other side, the sacred sword Kanglin was also staring at Nie Tian. The corner of his lips curled into a playful smile. He murmured, "He actually became an over-god in a single night, and he even has the ability to increase his strength in an instant." Interesting. Kanglin had been paying attention to Nie Tian. He didn't feel threatened by Nie Tian's increase in strength. Instead, he felt excited. To a powerful hunter, if the prey was too weak, then it would lose the fun of hunting. After killing Liang Fei with a single sword strike, Nie Tian swept his gaze across the area, only to discover that Yang Sun had long since disappeared. Nie Tian smiled helplessly. He then moved and left the sword field. The scene of Nie Tian killing Liang Fei caused a great commotion. It took a long time for it to calm down. The swordsman tournament continued. The following battles were not worthy of Nie Tian's attention. But not long after, a battle attracted Nie Tian's attention. In the ninth sword field, two figures stood on the stone pillars. These two figures were people that Nie Tian was familiar with. They were Cher and Xinyuan Yinsong. Nie Tian didn't expect that these two would meet in advance. Their battle immediately attracted many people's attention. Gongsun Xingji and the others on the spectator stand all had their eyes on the ninth sword field. Brother Xinyuan, who do you think has a higher chance of winning this battle? Xian Zongfeng was the first to speak. He looked at Xinyuan Hao Pagoda with a strange gaze. Xinyuan Hao Pagoda was from a Xinyuan clan who came with Xinyuan Yinsong. Xian Zongfeng's attitude towards him was obviously that of watching a good show. I don't know. Xinyuan Hao Pagoda was stunned for a while. He did not comment and only shook his head. Seeing Xinyuan Hao Pagoda's reaction, the others knew that he was afraid. Chapter 1998. The exalted ones, who were watching the battle from high above, were shocked by Gongsun Shengji's words. Xinyuan Haoda's expression was especially ugly. He couldn't help but say, Lord Divine Sword, I admit that the girl named Shui Ling is terrifyingly strong. To be able to reach the pinnacle of sword and martial arts as one at such a young age, she will definitely become a legendary swordsman in the future. But she's only a peak-over god, and Yunsong is also a swordsman at the pinnacle of sword and martial arts as one. So she's even stronger than her. To say that Yunsong can't even take a single strike from Shui Ling is too much of a compliment. The others nodded, thinking that Xinyuan Haoda's words made sense. They all believed that Xinyuan Yunsong was no match for Shui Ling, but to say that he couldn't even take a single strike from Cher would be an exaggeration. Gongsun Shengji smiled faintly, but didn't say anything. He already had some understanding of Cher's identity, but of course he wouldn't reveal it. How could someone who was called Her Highness by the inescapable Net's Earthen Chief be an ordinary person? At the same time, in the ninth sword field, Xinyuan Yunsong had a faint smile on his face as he said loudly, You're a woman, so I'll let you make the first move. You go first. I go first? Cher was taken aback for a moment. Then she sneered, If I go first, I'm afraid you won't have a chance. Huh? Xinyuan Yunsong's expression darkened, and he looked a little embarrassed. Young lady, you're too arrogant. Cher suddenly looked up, but she didn't say anything. She just said coldly, Make your move. Feeling humiliated, Xinyuan Yunsong's expression turned cold. A long sword appeared in his hand, and he thrust it out without hesitation. Suddenly, a sword shadow shot toward Cher. Xinyuan Yunsong was an early-stage paramount god at the pinnacle of sword and martial arts as one. On top of that, he had fused the origin power of wind into his body, which made his sword intent far sharper than other swordsmen of the same level. Such a powerful sword strike was enough to kill a mid-stage paramount god in an instant. It's fast, but not powerful enough, Cher said in a cold and indifferent voice. Her silhouette flickered, and she dodged Xinyuan Yunsong's attack. He dodged it. Xinyuan Yunsong's eyes trembled, and he was shocked by this strange scene. He was most proud of his speed, but he didn't expect someone to be able to dodge his sword. It was too scary. It's over. In the next moment, while Xinyuan Yunsong was still in shock, a cold and clear voice resounded in the air. Immediately after, a scarlet sword shadow fell from the sky like a blood-red waterfall, falling towards Xinyuan Yunsong. Xinyuan Yunsong didn't have the slightest time to react and was sent flying by the sword shadow. After retreating for a few thousand meters, he finally stabilized his body. Thank you for your mercy. Xinyuan Yunsong was stunned for a few seconds, and when he came to his senses, he quickly bowed to Cher and thanked her. He wasn't too stupid. He could tell that Cher was being merciful. If Cher really wanted to kill someone, Xinyuan Yunsong would already be a corpse. Everyone looked at the scene in front of them in horror, and they had not yet recovered from the shock. Too many unexpected experts had appeared in the evil-edged sword duel this time, shocking everyone's nerves again and again. Looking at Shui from afar, Nietian couldn't help but let out a bitter smile. He thought to himself, Shui's strength is already very strong, and the Netherworld Emperor's sacred garment she's wearing makes her even more formidable. I hope I don't run into her in the next fight. Nietian knew very well that the reason Shui was able to dodge Xianyuan Yunsong's sword was because of the Netherworld Emperor holy garment. Xianyuan Yunsong's sword was so fast that even a late paramount god might not be able to dodge it. After all, Shui was only a peek-over god. It was impossible for her to dodge Xianyuan Yunsong's sword with her own strength. As the number of people in the swordsman competition decreased, the competition progressed faster and faster. 2 days later, the competition was over, and the top 16 had been decided. The Evil Edge Sword competition was now in its final phase, the Sword Chief competition. The so-called Sword Chief competition was a battle between the top 16 to fight for the position of Sword Chief. Nietian had entered the top 16 without a hitch, and he'd won every single one of his matches. His luck had been pretty good, and he hadn't run into any particularly strong opponents in the swordsman competition. But he knew that the next Sword Chief competition would be the real battle. Swordsmen who could enter the top 16 were all true geniuses of the sword. The Sword Chief competition used a cruel one-on-one elimination system. The winner would advance to the next round, and the loser would be eliminated. Therefore, every battle that followed would be crucial. If one lost, they would have to bid farewell to the Sword Chief competition for good. At this moment, the Evil Edge sea was surging with people, and the sky was boiling with noise. Today was the day of the Sword Chief competition, and also the last day of the Evil Edge sword competition, because the Sword Chief would be decided today. Everyone was very excited. It was indeed a rare thing to be able to witness such a rare gathering of the sword. Before the Sword Chief competition truly began, many people were so excited that they couldn't control themselves. Sai, who do you think will be the champion of the Evil Edge sword competition? Do you even need to ask? Of course, it's Sacred Sword Kanglin. Sacred Sword Kanglin is a top swordsman from the Holy Parliament. Not to mention that he has a sacred sword in his hand. Just his own battle strength is unmatched by other swordsmen. Therefore, the Evil Edge Sword Chief this time will definitely be Sacred Sword Kanglin. That's not necessarily true. The battle strength that Nietian has displayed is also very strong. I think he also has a chance of competing for the Sword Chief competition. *T. The reason why Nietian is so strong is because the opponents he's faced before were too weak. Think about it. Has Nietian met a truly strong opponent so far? In my opinion, if he meets an opponent like Sacred Sword Kanglin, he probably won't even be able to withstand one strike. That's right. Although Nietian's strength is strange, Sacred Sword Kanglin is a true powerhouse. The difference between their realms is too great. If Nietian was given a few thousand years to cultivate, he might be able to fight Sacred Sword Kanglin. But it's impossible for him to fight Kanglin now. The crowd was discussing the biggest contenders for the Sword Chief competition this time. Among them, the two most controversial contenders were Nietian and Kanglin. Of these two, one was a famous figure, while the other was a swordsman from the Holy Parliament who could control a sacred sword. Although Nietian was in the limelight for the time being, compared to Sacred Sword Kanglin, he was clearly not as popular. Sacred Sword Kanglin's strength was more intuitive and could be clearly seen. On the other hand, Nietian's strength was even more strange, but no one was sure exactly how strong he was. This was because until now, Nietian had not met a truly strong opponent. Therefore, no one knew how strong he was. This was also the reason why many people were not optimistic about Nietian. Chapter 1999. I'll be the first to fight. Nietian's eyes glittered when he heard the judge's voice. His first opponent in the top 16 was Zhou Buffon, which made Nietian feel a lot more at ease. The top 16 were all freakishly talented swordsmen, but it was obvious who was stronger. Nietian was confident that he could fight anyone head-on, but he didn't want to run into a strong opponent right off the bat. Among the top 16, he didn't want to run into Saint's Word Kanglin. Second was Cher, third was Wind Fire Ice, and fourth was the mysterious ghost-masked warrior. Nie Tian had a rough estimate of the fighting prowess of the top 16, and the strongest of them all was Sage Sword King Billow. He was a late paramount god, and his cultivation in the Tao of the sword had reached the advanced level of sword martial unity. Considering that, he wasn't much weaker than Ghost Martial Wild Sand or any of the other experts in the Tao of the sword. That was why Nie Tian didn't want to run in his Saint's Word Kanglin. Without hesitation, Nie Tian leaped up and landed directly on a stone pillar in the sword field. At the same time, Zhuo Bufon's figure also appeared. He stared at Nie Tian with a pair of deep eyes. "We finally meet, Nie Tian," Zhuo Bufon said coldly, his eyes sharp and Nie Tian. Before the evil edge sword discourse, Zhuo Bufon had provoked Nie Tian and considered Nie Tian to be his biggest competitor. Unfortunately, there were too many strong opponents in the evil edge sword discourse, and Nie Tian wasn't the most eye-catching among the top 16. "Zhuo Bufon, this is the battle you've been waiting for. Unfortunately, your evil edge sword discourse will end here." Nie Tian smiled faintly, his expression extremely calm. With his current strength, there was really no need for him to take Zhuo Bufon seriously. "Is that so?" Zhuo Bufon smiled coldly, his mouth curling into a strange smile. A terrifying sword aura rose up from him, and his sword will spread out for thousands of meters, filling the void. Nie Tian couldn't help but be stunned when he saw this, and he said in astonishment, "Your sword Dao has broken through to the advanced stage?" Nie Tian clearly remembered that a few days ago, Zhuo Bufon was still at the primary realm of unity of sword and martial arts, and he had just advanced. In just a few days, he was able to make successive breakthroughs in the realm of Sword Tao. This was simply impossible. Zhuo Bufon was not an extremely monstrous swordsman. His breakthrough was very strange. "Nie Tian, are you scared?" When Zhuo Bufon saw Nie Tian's surprised reaction, he could not help but sneer and said loudly, "No one can stop me on the path of the evil-edged sword duel. If anyone dares to stop me, there's only one outcome: death." As soon as the word "die" fell, Zhuo Bufon's eyes surged with extremely strong killing intent. At this moment, Fat Cat's voice suddenly sounded and reminded Nie Tian. "Nie Tian, pay attention to his aura." Nie Tian was stunned for a moment, and then he activated the holographic divine pattern. He immediately sensed a very familiar aura in Zhuo Bufon's sword will. The blood-weeping sword infant. The blood-weeping sword infant. Nie Tian felt the aura of the blood-weeping sword infant in Zhuo Bufon's body, which made his expression change instantly. There was no doubt that Zhuo Bufon's successive breakthroughs in Sword Tao were all thanks to the blood-weeping sword infant. "Zhuo Bufon, what did you do?" Nie Tian instantly calmed down and roared in a deep voice. He really didn't expect that Zhuo Bufon would use the blood-weeping sword infant in order to go further on the evil-edge sword duel. Nie Tian didn't need to think to know the origin of the blood-weeping sword infant. He must have obtained it from Xian Zongfeng. Zhuo Bufon didn't know what the blood-weeping sword infant was at all. He only knew that the blood-weeping sword infant could instantly improve his sword Tao strength. This was too tempting for him, so he didn't hesitate to use the blood-weeping sword infant. "This is my business. It has nothing to do with you." Zhuo Bufon said Nie Tian coldly. His eyes were filled with killing intent as he said, "Nie Tian, you should worry about yourself. Let's see if you can walk out of the sword field alive." As soon as he finished speaking, the aura around Zhuo Bufon's body rose again. His whole body was like a giant sword standing in the void, extremely terrifying. Zhuo Bufon's aura attracted everyone's attention. Many people couldn't help but tremble. This guy called Zhuo Bufon is really powerful. No wonder he's the genius swordsman of the divine martial sword pagoda. He hid his strength so deeply and only revealed it now. His Sword Tao realm has reached the advanced realm of sword and martial arts as one. With such strength, he is definitely a strong opponent for Nie Tian. That's great. I thought this battle would definitely be finished with one sword strike. I didn't expect Zhuo Bufon to hide his strength. This battle is going to be interesting. Everyone thought that Zhuo Bufan had used some method to hide his strength before, and now he was just revealing his hidden strength. In fact, this idea was very reasonable. After all, it was too strange and impossible for a swordsman to improve his sword Tao's strength by 2 realms in a few days. Even experts like Gongsun Sheng were inclined to think that Zhuo Bufan had hidden his sword Tao cultivation. Only one person knew the truth, and that was Xian Zongfeng. At this time, Xian Zongfeng was staring at Zhuo Bufan with an extremely gloomy look. He said with a cold heart, Zhuo Bufan, don't let me down. I used an even stronger weeping blood sword nascent soul seed on you, and that seed was originally reserved for Sakura. Xian Zongfeng had specially found a stronger blood-weeping sword infant seed for Di Shirtian, but later, Di Shirtian already had a blood-weeping sword infant in his body to save Lien Wui. He did not want to waste the blood-weeping sword infant, so he found Zhuo Bufan and used a stronger blood-weeping sword infant seed on the latter. Xian Zongfeng knew that because Nie Tian had forced the evil peak sword competition to be brought forward, Zhuo Bufan hated Nie Tian very much. He wanted to use Zhuo Bufan to kill Nie Tian. Xian Zongfeng felt that with Zhuo Bufan's current strength, even if he could not kill Nie Tian, he could still cause some damage to the latter. Then, Nie Tian was more likely to die in the hands of others. He had long seen that Kanglin's sacred sword and the ghost-faced warrior did not have any good intentions towards Nie Tian. Besides Xian Zongfeng, Gongsun Sheng looked very embarrassed. He was not worried that Nie Tian would lose to Zhuo Bufan, but he was worried that Zhuo Bufan would be killed by Nie Tian if he pushed him too hard. No matter what, Zhuo Bufan was a genius of the divine martial sword pagoda. Of course, Gongsun Sheng did not want him to die. On the sword field, Nie Tian looked at Zhuo Bufan indifferently. He did not want to kill the latter, but he felt that it was a pity. Zhuo Bufan was also a genius in sword principle. If he was destroyed by Xian Zongfeng, it would be really unbearable. Nie Tian, make your move. Zhuo Bufan's aura was like a rainbow, and the sword essence around him surged like a storm. Even the space around him became violent. Zhuo Bufan, it seems that I have to face this battle. Nie Tian smiled faintly. Immediately, his body shook, and terrifying black runes surged out of his body. Chapter 2000. Nie Tian's aura began to skyrocket as he activated the 3 forbidden spells and the forbidden spell runes. The sudden scene caused everyone's eyes to tremble, and they immediately became terrified. My God, am I seeing things? He's getting stronger. He's really getting stronger. Did he use an energy detonation pill? No, it's not an energy detonation pill. It's the black magical talismans inside of him. Those magical talismans are terrifying. What kind of power is that? How could he suddenly become so strong? He's already a peak over god, and he's still getting stronger. He's an early paramount god. Screams rose and fell, and everyone's eyes were trembling with all their might. They couldn't believe the scene in front of them. In the blink of an eye, Nie Tian had risen an entire major level. It was completely bizarre. Zhuo Bufan's eyes flickered with confusion, but he quickly regained his composure. Is this your trump card, Nie Tian? He said coolly. It really is very strong, but do you really think you can beat me like that? Even if you're an early paramount god, your Tao of the sword is only at the level of forgetting yourself. I'm at the advanced level of the sword and martial arts as one. There's a huge gap between us. How are you going to fight me? Although Zhuo Bufan was a bit uneasy about Nie Tian's sudden increase in strength, he was still confident that he could defeat him. As far as Zhuo Bufan was concerned, the gap between the Tao of the sword and the martial path was just as insurmountable. He could easily crush Nie Tian by relying on the difference in their Tao of the sword. Whether I have the strength to fight with you or not, we'll know after you make your move. Nie Tian smiled faintly. His expression was very indifferent, as if he did not take Zhuo Bufan seriously. You're about to die, and you're still so arrogant? Are you looking to die? The calmer Nie Tian was, the angrier Zhuo Bufan became. With a low roar, he stabbed out with the long sword in his hand. Suddenly, a majestic sword intent surged out and condensed into a ferocious giant beast in the air. It opened its bloody mouth and pounced on Nietion. Nietion gaped. Joua Buffon's sword moves were different from those of ordinary swordsmen. His sword had taken the form of a beast. Very interesting. Sword cutting 8 desolation. Nietion slashed out with his sword. Instantly, the shadow of the sword was like a mountain, bursting out with a powerful aura. It turned into a billowing wave of chi that pushed forward. Boom! The two forces collided in the void, causing the surrounding space to suddenly stagnate. Endless power surged out. Nietion and Joua Buffon retreated hundreds of meters at the same time. They stood in the air and looked at each other, but their expressions were completely different. Joua Buffon looked surprised and even a little scared. He didn't expect that the power of Nietion's casual sword strike would be so strong that it could easily block his sword strike. Nietion, on the other hand, looked calm and indifferent. In terms of sword intent, Joua Buffon's sword intent was indeed stronger than Nietion's. After all, Joua Buffon was a high-level swordsman who had combined sword and martial arts into one, while Nietion was just a swordsman who had forgotten himself. The difference in their swordsmanship realm was too great. However, Nietion's advantage was that his martial body and strength were far superior to Joua Buffon's. Although both of them were early paramount gods, Nietion's martial body was far stronger than that of other cultivators of the same level. Therefore, every time he attacked, he unleashed power that far surpassed Joua Buffon's. Joua Buffon, do you really think you can kill me with only this much power? Nietion said with a faint smile, his tone extremely provocative. Nietion. Joua Buffon's eyes were cold and murderous. Provoked by Nietion, he was even angrier. You're courting death, he roared. Joua Buffon leaped up into the air and slashed down with his sword. Suddenly, a terrifying sword intent surged out, turning into a fearsome beast that charged toward Nietion with bared fangs and brandished claws. The beast was thousands of meters long, and it let out an angry roar as it flew through the air. Its huge body erupted with a powerful pressure that filled the space within 10,000 meters. The surrounding crowd felt the terrible pressure, and their faces fell. Joua Buffon's strength was beyond their imagination. Die! Joua Buffon roared. The beast threw its head back and roared, releasing a bloody and violent aura. The next moment, the beast swooped down and swallowed Nietion whole. The crowd's faces changed when they saw this. They were so shocked that they couldn't speak. It was an unbelievable scene. Nietion was actually swallowed by the fierce beast made of sword intent. The beast was filled with extremely violent sword intent. Nietion was swallowed by the sword intent, and he would definitely be strangled to death. What happened? Was Nietion really killed by Joua Buffon? Someone cried out in horror. The shock in his heart was written on his face. Although everyone was shocked, they still saw clearly that Nietion had been killed by Joua Buffon. Nietion, is this all you've got? You can't even withstand a single blow. Ha ha! Joua Buffon stared at Nietion and suddenly laughed wildly, as if he had gone mad. Nietion had been swallowed by the beast he had condensed. He would definitely die. However, just as Joua Buffon was laughing crazily, a voice suddenly rang out. Joua Buffon, do you really think you've killed me? A calm voice sounded, and then a shocking scene happened. Howl! The sword intent fierce beast let out a mournful howl, and then its huge body suddenly shook. A sword shadow actually burst out from within and tore the body of the sword intent fierce beast apart. A figure walked out from within. It was Nietion. The bizarre scene took everyone by surprise, and they all stared at Nietion in astonishment. No words could describe their feelings of astonishment. Nietion was not dead, and he even broke the beast. This was too terrifying. This is impossible. The person who was the most shocked was, of course, Joua Buffon. His eyes were wide open, and he couldn't believe the scene in front of him. Nietion could actually walk out of the beast's embrace. The strength of his martial body was incredible. Joua Buffon, I've said it before, you can't kill me with only this kind of power. Nietion smiled faintly, and then the sword momentum rose all over his body. The sharp and murderous sword intent filled the air, making him look extremely wild. Joe Buffon was in great shock at this time, and this was a good opportunity for Nietian to make a move. If he made a move at this moment, Joe Buffon would definitely be killed by the sword. However, Nietian did not do so. He had never intended to kill Joe Buffon. Joe Buffon was from the divine martial sword pagoda, and he was very talented in swordsmanship. Nietian did not want to kill him. I don't believe it. I don't believe you're so strong. Suddenly, Joe Buffon looked at Nietian and roared like a wild beast. Immediately, sword intent surged out of his body, and he slashed with his sword again. An even more terrifying, fierce beast made of sword intent appeared. Its powerful aura blotted out the sky and earth, and a terrible pressure pressed down like stormy waves. Chapter 2001. At the moment when Nietian's sword shadow whizzed out, Joe Buffon suddenly felt an incomparably powerful sword pressure and couldn't help but scream. He didn't expect that the power of Nietian's sword would be so terrifying. It had to be said that Nietian's strength was far beyond Joe Buffon's expectations. Joe Buffon, the battle between us is over. Immediately, Nietian's voice rang out, and the sword shadows pressed down like mountains and seas. The fierce beast released by the sword intent released by Joe Buffon seemed to feel threatened. It threw its head back and roared, which sounded like a miserable howl. Boom! The next moment, the sword shadow flew across the air, directly pierced through the fierce beast, and then attacked Joe Buffon. No! In an instant, Joe Buffon felt a terrible killing intent. He immediately screamed, and his handsome face turned as pale as a sheet of paper. At this moment, he felt an extremely strong aura of death, which made him tremble from the bottom of his heart. In addition to being mighty and powerful, Nietian's sword intent also had a sense of oppression that could take one's heart and soul. While crushing the opponent, it could also completely crush the opponent psychologically. What a terrible sword! Joe Buffon is dead for sure. When the crowd saw this scene, they were extremely shocked and cried out one after another. Nietian's sword shadow was so terrifying that it simply crushed Joe Buffon. At this moment, everyone realized that Nietian didn't show his real strength at all. He was just playing with Joe Buffon. Now that Nietian revealed his real combat strength, Joe Buffon immediately became vulnerable. On the high viewing platform, Gongsun Sheng and Xian Zongfeng, the two sword masters, stood up at the same time, showing a look of horror. However, what surprised them was completely different. Gongsun Sheng was worried about Joe Buffon's life, while Xian Zongfeng was shocked by Nietian's strength. Joe Buffon didn't meet his expectations. Bang! However, just when everyone was certain that Joe Buffon would definitely die, the sword shadow in the air suddenly shattered and turned into sword intent that dissipated in the air. Joe Buffon felt the impact of the sword intent, and his figure retreated thousands of meters away. When he stood still, his body was already drenched in sweat. You won't kill me? Joe Buffon was stunned on the spot for more than 10 seconds before he came to his senses and looked at Nietian in astonishment. In this battle, Joe Buffon showed the strongest killing intent. He had the idea of killing Nietian. Unfortunately, his strength was insufficient, and he was not Nietian's match at all. Nietian originally had the chance to kill Joe Buffon, but he did not do it, or rather, he gave up, which made the latter very puzzled. Because if it was Joe Buffon, he would definitely kill Nietian without the slightest hesitation. Joe Buffon, I just said that the battle between us is over, but I didn't say that I want your life. Nietian looked at Joe Buffon and smiled faintly. The sword intent on his body immediately dissipated. After saying that, Nietian moved and was about to leave, but he was stopped by Joe Buffon. Nietian, why didn't you kill me? Don't you know that I really want to kill you? Joe Buffon calmed down and asked with a low face. There is no reason. Nietian didn't look back. He just smiled faintly and said, If you must know why, then consider it as me giving face to His Excellency the Divine Sword Master. His calm voice fell, but the surrounding people were stunned. giving face to His Excellency the Divine Sword Master? Nie Tian's words seemed to be a bit exaggerated. Who was His Excellency the Divine Sword Master? He was the supreme person of the divine martial sword pagoda and the #1 swordsman in the 9 realms. His high status was self-evident. What about Nie Tian? Nie Tian was indeed very famous now. He was absolutely in the limelight, but this was compared to swordsmen of the same generation. If he was compared to an expert like Gongsun Xingji, it would be too high a compliment. Even if the status of Nie Tian and Gongsun Xingji could not be described as completely different, there was not much difference. Nie Tian said in public that he was giving face to Gongsun Xingji, which made him suspect that he was using Gongsun Xingji to elevate himself. In the eyes of many people, Nie Tian's words were very shameless and somewhat shameless. Zhuo Bufan was stunned at first. Then he sneered and said loudly, Nie Tian, you overestimate yourself. Do you think you are worthy of giving face to His Excellency the Divine Sword Master? Zhuo Bufan was very grateful that Nie Tian did not kill him. But what Nie Tian said just now was regarded as another provocation to the divine martial sword pagoda, which made his anger rise again. At this time, the others also began to discuss. Nie Tian's words are a little too shameless. What kind of status does His Excellency have? He thinks too highly of himself to be on the same level as His Excellency. That's too much. That's right. Even if Nie Tian is now more famous than everyone else, he is too arrogant to put himself on the same level as His Excellency, the Divine Sword Master. His Excellency, the Divine Sword Master, is the best swordsman in the 9 regions. Nie Tian is just a junior, yet he wants to give face to His Excellency, the Divine Sword Master. What a joke! Nie Tian frowned slightly and immediately realized that what he had just said was not appropriate. He could not help but smile bitterly. In fact, Nie Tian's real intention at this moment was indeed to give face to Gongsun Xingji, so he did not kill Zhuo Bufan. However, it was a little uncomfortable for him to say this out loud. Gongsun Xingji was extremely famous in the 9 regions, especially in the hearts of swordsmen. He was almost like a god and could not be desecrated. Nie Tian's words just now had accidentally angered everyone. Zhuo Bufan, since you think that I am not worthy of giving face to His Excellency the Divine Sword Master, I will take back my words. Nie Tian thought for a moment and was about to take back his words, but he was interrupted by a voice in the middle of his sentence. Mr. Nie Tian, a powerful voice resounded in the sky. Then a figure appeared and landed in front of everyone. He said loudly, You didn't kill Zhuo Bufan, which is a great honor to the divine martial sword pagoda. I, Gongsun Sheng, am extremely grateful. Everyone's eyes suddenly trembled. They looked as if they had eaten a pig's gallbladder. They were as shocked as they could be and as ugly as they could be. At this moment, the person who stood out to speak was the divine sword master, Gongsun Xingji. Moreover, everyone heard very clearly that Gongsun Xingji did not directly call Nie Tian by his name. Instead, he added the word Mr. behind it. Everyone knew that the word Mr. was a respectful title that warriors used to address people they respected. Most of the time, the word Mr. carried more weight than His Excellency. Gongsun Xingji's way of addressing Nie Tian was enough to show that he did not put Nie Tian on the same level as himself. Instead, he put Nie Tian on a higher level than himself. In Gongsun Xingji's eyes, Nie Tian was someone who was superior to him. By the time everyone understood everything, their faces were filled with extreme shock. No words could describe the shock in their hearts. Everyone had heard that Nie Tian had forced Gongsun Xingji to lower his head and bring forward the evil edge sword competition. Logically speaking, shouldn't Gongsun Xingji hate Nie Tian very much? Why was he still showing respect to him? This was too strange. Chapter 2002. Nie Tian didn't look too good either. He didn't expect Gongsun Sheng to step out to help him. In the end, he could only smile awkwardly and say, Divine Sword Master, you're being too serious. Of course, he knew that Gongsun Sheng was willing to step out and call him Mr. in front of everyone because he could save Gongsun Sheng's life. At this moment, Gong Sun Xingji was standing up for himself, not for Nie Tian. If Nie Tian hadn't saved his life, Gong Sun Xing definitely wouldn't have stepped out. Gong Sun Sheng smiled faintly. Then, he looked into the void, and a strange smile appeared on his face. He said loudly, "Alliance Master Jiang, since you're here, why don't you show yourself?" Nie Tian's eyes narrowed, and his heart sank when he heard Gong Sun Sheng's words. Gong Sun Sheng called out Alliance Master Jiang, which made Nie Tian's expression change instantly. There were only two famous Alliance Masters in the 9 major realms. One was the Wind and Cloud Alliance Master, and the other was the Xingtian Alliance Master. If Gong Sun Sheng called out Alliance Master Jiang, it was undoubtedly the Xingtian Alliance Master Jiang Lai. Jiang Lai had actually come to the Evil Edge sword duel. The news made Nie Tian's head spin. He followed Gong Sun Sheng's gaze and looked in the direction Gong Sun Sheng was looking. Nie Tian wasn't the only one who was surprised. The others were also stunned for a moment before they reacted and looked in the same direction. The void was completely silent. There was nothing there. However, at this moment, the void trembled slightly. Then, a figure in green appeared with a faint smile on his lips. He said loudly, "Brother Gong Sun, how have you been?" The azure-robed figure took a step forward and arrived less than 100 meters away from Gong Sun Shengji. The moment this figure appeared, Nie Tian's pupils shrank. The shock in his eyes was extreme. The figure in green that appeared in front of him was none other than the Xingtian Alliance Master, Jiang Lai. After all, Jiang Lai and Nie Tian had a deep grudge against each other. Most directly, Jiang Lai was the main culprit behind Jian Xingqi's death. Moreover, Jiang Lai was also the person who forced Nie Tian to separate from Mo Rushi and share. Also, when Nie Tian's father was imprisoned by the Holy Parliament, Jiang Lai was one of the accomplices. With so much hatred entangled together, Nie Tian's hatred for Jiang Lai was no less than Calamity Nine's. If it wasn't for the fact that he still had some rationality left, Nie Tian would have definitely gone up to fight Jiang Lai. He did not do so because he knew that he was too weak and was not a match for Jiang Lai at all. According to what Nie Tian knew, there were 4 supreme existences in the 9 major realms, and one of them was Jiang Lai. He also knew of the other 3. One was the Sacred Alliance leader, 9 Gods Calamity. One was the Wind and Cloud Alliance leader, Nie Dao, and the last was the Heaven Chief of the Net Above and Earth. It was not an exaggeration to say that Jiang Lai was stronger than Gong Sun Sheng. The moment Mr. Jiang Lai appeared, Guiwu Guangsha's eyes darkened as anger rose in his eyes. However, he still suppressed the anger in his heart and did not make a move. Now is not the time to reveal his trump cards to Jiang Lai. Moreover, Guiwu Guangsha knew that his strength was far below Jiang Lai's. Alliance leader Xingtian's presence has truly surprised I. Gong Sun Xing nodded with a smile, appearing very enthusiastic. Although Jiang Lai used to be a member of the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda, his status was not the same as before. Even Gong Sun Sheng, who was the Divine Sword Master, could only barely be on equal footing with Jiang Lai. I had nothing to do, so I just came to take a look. Jiang Lai smiled faintly as his gaze swept across the crowd. When he saw Nie Tian, his eyes clearly flickered for a moment before returning to normal. At this moment, the audience below was in an uproar. Their expressions were extremely excited as they looked at Jiang Lai with scorching eyes and incomparable respect. Alliance leader Xingtian was one of the pinnacle existences in the 9 major realms. To be able to witness his peerless grace was a great honor even for ordinary people. However, there was not the slightest bit of respect in Nie Tian's eyes at this moment. There was only anger and killing intent. He knew that Jiang Lai's appearance here was definitely not as simple as taking a look. Jiang Lai's arrival was most likely because of Nie Tian. However, with Jiang Lai's status, he would definitely not make a move against Nie Tian in front of so many people. Therefore, he must have other methods to deal with Nie Tian. Alliance leader Jiang, please. Gong Sun Sheng smiled faintly and turned to the side, inviting Jiang Lai to the highest viewing platform. Wait. Jiang Lai smiled faintly at this moment. He raised his head and looked at the void. The corners of his mouth curled into a strange smile as he said in a loud voice, "Brother Nangong, and that unknown friend over there, since you are all here, please come out and meet me." Jiang Lai's words stunned everyone as they looked at the void. Who would have thought that there would be someone in the void? Oh, Gong Sun Sheng was also stunned. His expression instantly became strange. He had never expected that there would be two experts hidden in the void. The two hidden experts were obviously not weaklings. Otherwise, they would not have been able to conceal their auras so perfectly. Alliance leader Jiang, Sword Master Gongsun, Nangong Dushio greets you. At this moment, a voice resounded in the void, following which a black-clothed figure appeared and stepped on the void, arriving beside Jiang Lai and Gongsun Sheng. Nangong Dushio. Nie Tian suddenly raised his head and looked at the black-clothed figure. His eyes that had just calmed down trembled once again. The person who had appeared was his other great enemy, the Deputy President of the Holy Parliament, Nangong Dushio. Back in the Divine Shepherd domain, Nie Tian had fought with Nangong Dushio and almost died at her hands. He did not expect that the Evil Peak sword competition would not only alarm Jiang Lai, but also Nangong Dushio. The Heaven Punishment Alliance and the Holy Parliament were two supreme experts of the two peak factions. It was a rare sight to see such a scene at the same time. President Nangong, no wonder I felt a familiar aura. It's you. It seems that you have concealed yourself better than me. Jiang Lai looked at Nangong Dushio and said with a faint smile, Alliance leader Jiang, you must be joking. I just don't want to cause any unnecessary trouble. Nangong Dushio also smiled and looked at Gongsun Sheng. Sword Master Gongsun, I hope you won't blame me for coming uninvited. Not at all. It is the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda's honor to have President Nangong personally come to the Evil Peak sword competition. Gongsun Sheng was puzzled, but he still looked calm on the surface. At this moment, Gongsun Sheng had already sensed that something was wrong. If Jiang Lai's arrival was just a coincidence, then it could barely be explained. However, Nangong Dushio's subsequent appearance was very strange. The strangest thing was that the two of them had been hiding in the dark. If Gongsun Sheng had not accidentally discovered Jiang Lai, the two of them would not have come out. It was too unusual for two peak experts to appear at the Evil Peak sword competition at the same time. It seemed that the two of them had come with a purpose. Gongsun Sheng already had a guess as to what their purpose was. It was Nie Tian. Jiang Lai and Nangong Dushio had come for Nie Tian. Just at this moment, the space trembled once again. Soon after, another figure appeared. However, he stood far away in the sky and did not descend. Jiang Lai, Nangong Dushio, Gongsun Sheng, and the others raised their heads in confusion. They did not know this person. Chapter 2003. Firestorm, Thousand Feathers. Guiwu Quang Sha shouted a name in his heart, and his face instantly became dull. Although he was tens of thousands of meters away from the figure in the sky, and the latter had used a special method to hide his face, he could still tell from the latter's aura that this person was Thousand Feather Tower's master. Firestorm, Thousand Feathers. Firestorm Thousand Feathers used to be Guiwu Quang Sha's disciple, and was even brought up by Guiwu Quang Sha. The latter was too familiar with this aura and would never mistake it. Guiwu Quang Sha was very sure that the figure in the sky was Firestorm Thousand Feathers. In fact, Guiwu Quang Sha had a premonition that Thousand Feather Tower was going to make a big move against the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, but he was still surprised when Firestorm Thousand Feathers actually appeared. The appearance of Firestorm Thousand Feathers also attracted the attention of others. Most of them looked shocked. Who are you? Gongsun Sheng looked at Firestorm Thousand Feathers from afar, and his deep voice resounded in the air with a strong sense of oppression. Although Fenghua Qianyu was restraining his aura, he was still unable to conceal his aura. He stood there like a vast ocean, vast and vigorous. A debt collector, Firestorm Thousand Feathers said coldly. His aura was cold. Even the people who were tens of thousands of meters away could feel the chill. A debt collector? Gongsun Sheng heard what Firestorm Thousand Feathers said and asked doubtfully, Who are you? Do you have any grudges against the Shenwu Sword Pagoda? Gong Sun Sheng didn't know who Firestorm Thousand Feathers was at all. He was in a mess. But he could feel that Firestorm Thousand Feathers' aura was very strong, even slightly stronger than him. He had never seen such a fearsome swordsman before, and he felt a genuine sense of threat from him. Gong Sun Sheng, you will know who I am soon. You don't have much time left. I will make my move when the Evil Edge sword competition ends. Treasure it. Firestorm Thousand Feathers released a cold aura, and his deep voice was very scary. When everyone heard this, their eyes were filled with astonishment. Firestorm Thousand Feathers' words were a threat, a naked threat. To publicly threaten the Divine Swordmaster during the Evil Peak Sword meet was simply too arrogant. Jiang Lai and Nangong Duxiu glanced at each other with a casual smile on their faces. They clearly had no intention of saying anything and were just watching the show from the side. How dare you, sir? Gong Sun Shengji's eyes darkened, and his expression changed abruptly. His entire body was filled with murderous intent, and a terrifying sword momentum was immediately released. It was like a rainbow piercing through the heavens and earth, mighty and chilling. What a strong sword force! Everyone exclaimed when they felt the terrifying pressure of the sword force. However, the wind flame Thousand Feathers in the sky was not afraid at all. He sneered and said loudly, Gong Sun Shengji, you are indeed worthy of being the #1 swordsman in the 9 major realms. You actually broke through to the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one. This is really an eye-opener. The legendary realm of the unification of sword and martial arts. As the wind flame Thousand Feathers' words fell, everyone's eyes trembled, and they cried out in surprise at the same time. Most of the people present were swordsmen. Of course, they understood what the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one meant. It had been nearly 1,000,000 years since a legendary swordsman appeared in the 9 major realms. At this moment, Gong Sun Shengji revealed his true strength, and it was imaginable how shocked everyone was. I will ask you again, who are you? Gong Sun Shengji growled in a deep voice, and his eyes were filled with murderous intent. Gong Sun Shengji, don't be so anxious. Now is not the time for us to fight. I still have some things that I don't understand. When I understand everything, it will be the time for us to fight to the death. Wind Flame Thousand Feathers said coldly. From what Qian Yu said coldly. Before he finished speaking, his figure suddenly moved, and he stretched out his hand. Instantly, a vast and boundless mighty force appeared and filled the air. It actually enveloped Zhuobu Fan. How dare you? Gong Sun Shengji frowned, and he immediately understood. He roared, stepped forward, and directly slapped with his palm. Using his palm as a sword, he condensed a sword shadow and blocked Wind Flame Thousand Feathers' attack. Zhuobu Fan was already scared out of his wits. He did not dare to move, and his whole body was drenched in sweat. How dare you attack someone from the divine martial sword pagoda in front of me? Gong Sun Shengji looked at Wind Flame Thousand Feathers with a gloomy face and roared crazily. Although he was extremely angry, he did not directly attack Wind Flame Thousand Feathers as if he was afraid of something. Of course, Nietian knew what Gong Sun Shengji was worried about. Because of the forbidden blood seal in his body, he could not fully use his swordsmanship strength. If he really fought with Wind Flame Thousand Feathers, it was difficult to say who would win. With Gong Sun Shengji's fiery temper, if it was not for the forbidden blood seal in his body, he would have already killed Wind Flame Thousand Feathers. Gong Sun Shengji, there is something in this boy's body that I am interested in. I really want to know who left that thing in his body. Wind Flame Thousand Feathers smiled coldly, and then his body moved. His whole body surged with a huge sword essence, and a wall of fire appeared in the air, separating Gong Sun Shengji. Then, Wind Flame Thousand Feathers grabbed with his hand, and a mighty force pressed towards Zhuobu Fan. It seemed that Wind Flame Thousand Feathers was very interested in Zhuobu Fan. Don't even think about it. Gong Sun Shengji shouted angrily, and the long sword in his hand suddenly stabbed out. A terrible sword shadow appeared, and it bombarded the wall of fire in the air. Rumble! The air suddenly trembled, And the strange thing was that Gongsun Shengji's sword actually could not break the wall of fire. Gongsun Shengji frowned, and his face instantly darkened. He once again blasted out his sword, and finally, the wall of fire was smashed into pieces. But unfortunately, at this time, Wind Flame Thousand Feathers' figure was already gone, and Zhuo Bufan also disappeared together with him. Damn it! Gongsun Shengji could not feel the breath of Wind Flame Thousand Feathers. He roared angrily, and all the hair on his body stood up like an angry lion. Wind Flame Thousand Feathers actually kidnapped Zhuo Bufan in front of him. How could Gongsun Shengji not be angry? At this time, everyone present was stunned. No one thought that Wind Flame Thousand Feathers' strength was so strong that he could actually take Zhuo Bufan away under Gongsun Shengji's eyes. Everyone had some doubts in their hearts. It seemed that Gongsun Shengji's strength was not as strong as they thought. Since Gongsun Shengji has broken through to the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one, his strength should not be limited to this. Could it be that there is something strange about this matter? Jiang Lai also had doubts in his heart, but he did not think too much about it, because it was none of his business. At this moment, the person with the most embarrassed expression was not Gongsun Shengji, but Xian Zongfeng. At this time, Xian Zongfeng's expression was not only embarrassed, but also panicked. Why did Wind Flame Thousand Feathers take Zhuo Bufan away? Perhaps others did not know the reason, but Xian Zongfeng vaguely guessed something, and that was why his expression was so embarrassed. On the other side, Nie Tian's brows were also slightly furrowed. He had also guessed something. Wind Flame Thousand Feathers said that there was something in Zhuo Bufan's body that he was interested in, and he wanted to know who left this thing in Zhuo Bufan's body. What was this thing? Chapter 2004. Blood-Weeping Sword Infant. Nie Tian believed that the thing that the Firestorm Thousand Feathers was interested in was precisely the blood-weeping sword infant. While Nie Tian was surprised, he also saw Xian Zongfeng's reaction clearly. This made him even more certain that the thing that Fenghua Qianyu wanted to figure out was the blood-weeping sword infant. Fenghua Qianyu said it very clearly. He really wanted to know who left the blood-weeping sword infant in Zhuo Bufan's body. The person who planted the blood-weeping sword infant in Zhuo Bufan's body was none other than Xian Zongfeng. This was the reason why Xian Zongfeng panicked. Nie Tian was very puzzled. Why would the Firestorm Thousand Feathers be interested in the blood-weeping sword infant? According to Gewu Kuangsha, the grudge between Fenghua Qianyu and the Xinwu Sword Pagoda was mainly because Fenghua Qianyu's father, Fenghua Lianqing, had died during a mission of the Xinwu Sword Pagoda. Wind and Fire thought that it was the Xinwu Sword Pagoda that killed his father, so he wanted to seek revenge on the Xinwu Sword Pagoda. Could it be that the deaths of the Wind and Fire Masters have something to do with the blood-weeping sword infant? Nie Tian's eyes suddenly trembled as a shocking thought appeared in his mind. Gewu Kuangsha had said that the Wind and Fire duo Cheng was once the sword champion of the Evil Edge Sword Discourse. There is no need to doubt his talent in the way of the sword. The blood-weeping sword infant liked swordsmen with high talent in the sword Dao. The higher the swordsman's talent in the sword Dao, the stronger the blood-weeping sword infant would be. From this point of view, if Xian Zongfeng had wanted to find a suitable host for the blood-sobbing sword infant from the Xinwu Sword Pagoda, Wind and Fire were undoubtedly the most suitable candidates. Could it be that the Wind and Fire Masters were the same as Lian Wui? They were both chosen by Xian Zongfeng to be the host of the blood-weeping sword infant. Nie Tian's mind was working fast, and his expression changed again. In the beginning, he felt that his idea was too outrageous, but as he slowly analyzed it, he felt that the possibility was very high. Gewu Kuangsha also felt that there was something fishy about the deaths of the Wind and Fire Masters. However, he was unable to find any suspicious points. The blood-weeping sword infant was hidden very deeply. Even Gongsun Shengji didn't discover the blood-weeping sword infant in Lian Wui's body. It was reasonable that Gewu Kuangsha didn't find the blood-weeping sword infant. Fenghua Qian, you had always believed that his father was killed by the Xinwu Sword Pagoda. He must have found something, most likely the blood-tear sword infant. Nie Tian analyzed all of this, and the shock in his heart was written on his face. He vaguely felt that perhaps Xian Zongfeng was the culprit behind the deaths of the Wind and Fire Masters. However, all of this was just his conjecture, and he didn't have any proof. Perhaps, with a wind flame, 1,000 feathers appeared again, the truth would surface. The appearance of Jiang Lai and the others caused a huge commotion. It took a long time for the crowd to calm down. Gong Sun Sheng had already returned to the high viewing platform. Beside him were two important figures, Xingtian Alliance Master Jiang Lai and the Holy Assembly's Vice President Nangong Duxiu. There were too many experts in this evil edge sword duel. The atmosphere of the entire scene was a little strange. The Sword Chiefs competition continued. The battles of the top 16 were very exciting, but there was a difference in strength between the two sides. Presumably, the Shenwu Sword Pagoda had left the top 8 for last. Nie Tian was the first to enter the top 8, and half a day later, the top 8 had all appeared. They were Nie Tian, Song Lan, Xinyuan Yunsong, Wind Fire, Bing Hong, Snow Spirit, Evil Soul Remnant, Lien Wui, and Jiang Yuji. Phantasm Life Destroyer was the name of the ghost-faced swordsman. The crowd was in an uproar. The top 8 are finally here. They're all very strong, especially Sagely Sword Kanglin. He's a late paramount god and has a high-level sword and martial fusion cultivation base. He's definitely going to be the sword chief in this evil edge sword competition. That's right. No wonder Sagely Sword Kanglin is a swordsman from the Holy Assembly. He's a terrifying swordsman who can wield a sage sword. Anyone else would be nothing but cannon fodder against him. Not necessarily. Fenghua Ice and Phantasm Life Destroyer are both very strong. If Sagely Sword Kanglin meets strong opponents, he might not be able to make it to the end. Don't tell me you've forgotten about Nie Tian. He's the one who brought this evil edge sword competition forward. Up until now, no one has ever forced him to use his true strength. Nie Tian might be strong, but he's only a god lord. Even if he has a secret magic that pushes him to the early paramount god level, there's no way he'll be a match for the others. The way I see it, the fact that Nie Tian brought the evil edge sword competition forward is just going to benefit someone else. He's only going to be a supporting character in the Sword Chiefs competition. I agree. If Nie Tian were a few thousand years older, he might be able to fight Sagely Sword Kanglin and the others. But right now, that's not going to happen. The discussions of the crowd rose one after another. When the top 8 cultivators heard them, some of them were laughing, while others were feeling bitter. Most people were of the opinion that Sagely Sword Kanglin would definitely take first place in the evil edge sword competition. If there was anyone who could pose a threat to Kanglin, it would be Fenghua Ice and Phantasm Life Destroyer. Both of them were mid-paramount gods, and Phantasm Life Destroyer could use his sword to create illusions that were very bizarre. As for Nie Tian and the others, they were completely ignored. Obviously, they weren't strong enough to compete for the title of Sword Chief. Nie Tian's reaction was very calm. He wasn't the type of person who would be affected by what anyone said. After all, he had experienced countless deadly battles, and had long since reached the level of being as calm as still water. His opponents were the other top 8, not these gossiping spectators. Kanglin's eyes were fixed on Nie Tian, and he didn't care about what the crowd was saying. In fact, he didn't even care about the title of Sword Chief. His only goal in participating in the evil edge sword competition was to kill Nie Tian. Of course, Song Lan wouldn't mind killing Nie Tian and taking the title of Sword Chief in the evil edge sword competition. On the other side, Phantasm Life Destroyer's cold eyes were locked onto Nie Tian. His goal in participating in the evil edge sword competition was the same as Kanglin's, to kill Nie Tian. Nie Tian had guessed correctly. Phantasm Life Destroyer was indeed an assassin. His true identity was the leader of the 13 reverse scale spikes. The 13 reverse scale spikes were the most terrifying assassins of the reverse scale, and Nie Tian had killed them before. Phantasm Life Destroyer had come to the evil edge sword competition not only to carry out his mission, but also to take revenge. Both Sagely Sword Kanglin and Phantasm Life Destroyer would be Nie Tian's most terrifying opponents. In the battle of the top 8, The two sides were no longer specially arranged. Instead, they were drawn randomly. Nietian was confident that he could defeat anyone, but if he had to defeat Phantasm Life Destroyer first, then fight Kanglin, he would be in danger. Nietian prayed in his heart that it would be best if Kanglin fought Phantasm Life Destroyer or Windfire Ice Greatsword first. Top 8 battles. First match, Nietian versus Jiang Yuji. At this moment, the referee's voice rang out in the void, announcing the start of the first match of the top 8. When Nietian heard his own voice and heard that his opponent was Jiang Yuji, he couldn't help but smile. Jiang Yuji had been defeated by him, so he was naturally very happy to meet this opponent. Wait, however, at this moment, a vigorous voice suddenly rang out, and a figure stepped out from the sky. Chapter 2005. Jiang Lai suddenly appeared and stopped the battle between Nietian and Jiang Yuji. Everyone was stunned and raised their heads to look at him. Jiang Lai stood in the air with a faint smile on his face. He did not speak immediately and seemed to be thinking about something. Nietian looked at Jiang Lai from afar with a cold smile on his face. He thought to himself, "Jiang Lai, you better make Jiang Yuji admit defeat. Otherwise, I will kill him in front of you." Nietian believed that Jiang Lai definitely knew that he would not show mercy to Jiang Yuji. That was why he came out to stop the battle. He had already made up his mind that as long as Jiang Yuji stepped onto the sword field, he would not let him walk out alive. Alliance leader Jiang, is there something wrong? Gong Sunsheng could not help but frown when he saw that Jiang Lai did not speak. There had been too many accidents in this evil edge sword duel. Gong Sunsheng would not allow any more accidents to happen. Brother Gong Sun, every evil edge sword duel is a one-on-one battle. Don't you think this method of battle is too monotonous? Jiang Lai's lips curled into a strange smile as he spoke. Gong Sunsheng was stunned and asked, "Alliance leader Jiang, what do you mean by that?" The evil edge sword duel and the sword chief duel were meant to be one-on-one battles. Was there any other method of battle? The others were also confused, not knowing what Jiang Lai was up to. What I mean is, since the top 8 have already been decided, why not let them fight together and have a real battle? The one who remains will be the sword chief. This way, not only will we be able to determine the strongest person, but it will also increase the enjoyment of the battle. In the end, we can even end the top 8 in one battle. Why not? Jiang Lai's lips curled up slightly as he spoke with a gloomy expression. Fight together? Gong Sunsheng was stunned and frowned. Alliance leader Jiang, do you want the top 8 to have a big battle royale? What's wrong with that? Jiang Lai smiled calmly. At this moment, the crowd finally understood what Jiang Lai meant. The scene immediately exploded. A battle royale between the top 8 has never happened before. If it really happened, it would be very exciting. Yes, the top 8 are all genius swordsmen. A one-on-one battle royale is already exciting enough. If all 8 of them fight at the same time, it would be too much to watch. Alliance leader Zhang's suggestion is not bad. We can give it a try. Only the strongest person will be able to survive until the end. The crowd excitedly discussed and actually agreed with Jiang Lai's suggestion. Niet Tian furrowed his eyebrows, his expression extremely unsightly. Jiang Lai was truly cunning. He must have realized that Kanglin's sacred sword and life destroyer had strong killing intent towards Nietian. That was why he had suggested such a method of battle. If Canglan and the evil soul remnant attacked Nietian at the battle royale how would he be? Jiang and Nietian would not be able to win. Each of Tian and Tian would Jiang and Tian. Jiang would be able. Tian would and Tian. To be B, Roy would be able and Tian and B, Chun, Jiang, and Jiang not. Tian and Chun and Shun, Chun, Jiang, 1, Tian, Chun Feng Yu Jiang Shun, Jiang Tian Jiang, and Ji Shun. And Jiang Tian. Jiang from Tian at Chun Tian, Jiang Tian. No, absolutely not. Gong Sunsheng shouted angrily. The evil peak sword competition has always been one-on-one battles. There has never been a battle royale. Alliance leader Zhang's suggestion is absolutely unacceptable. Jiang Lai had already expected Gong Sun Xingji's reaction, so he was not surprised at all. With a faint smile, he looked at Nangong Duxiu and said loudly, "Brother Nangong, what do you think of my suggestion?" Alliance Leader Zhang's suggestion is very good. I wholeheartedly agree with it. Nangong Duxiu, who had obviously seen through Jiang Lai's intention, smiled and responded. Alliance Leader Nangong. Gong Sun Sheng was stunned and looked at Nangong Duxiu in astonishment. He felt so stifled that he could not say anything. Jiang Lai and Nangong Duxiu were working together to force Gong Sun Sheng to agree. One of them was Alliance Leader Xing Tian, while the other was the Vice President of the Sacred Assembly. Both of them represented a faction stronger than the divine martial sword pagoda. On the surface, Jiang Lai was giving advice to Gong Sun Sheng, but he was actually pressuring him. "Everyone, what do you think of the battle royale for the top 8? Jiang Lai looked at the crowd and shouted loudly. Alliance Leader Zhang's suggestion is very good. We agree to the battle royale. Everyone was in high spirits and shouted, "Battle royale! Battle royale! Battle royale!" Then everyone started to shout at the same time, as if they had gone crazy. They were just here to watch the show. The more exciting the battle, the better. They did not care about anything else. Gong Sun Sheng's expression darkened. He was so embarrassed that he could not say anything. "Brother Gong Sun, it is not good to offend everyone." Jiang Lai, on the other hand, had a calm expression on his face as he said, "Since everyone is so enthusiastic, why don't Brother Gong Sun make an exception and let the top 8 have a battle royale?" Brother Gong Sun, Alliance Leader Zhang's suggestion is not unreasonable. Suddenly, another voice came from behind Gong Sun Sheng. It was Xian Zongfeng. "Xian Zongfeng, you?" Gong Sun Sheng looked at Xian Zongfeng in disbelief. He did not expect Xian Zongfeng to stab him in the back. The light in Gong Sun Sheng's eyes dimmed, and he seemed to have aged a few decades. He knew that if he insisted on this, it would bring disaster to the divine martial sword pagoda. After some thought, Gong Sun Sheng finally looked up and said with difficulty, "A battle royale is fine, but all 8 must agree." "Okay, no problem." Seeing that Gong Sun Sheng had finally relented, Jiang Lai smiled faintly. Then he turned to look at Tian and the others and said in a loud voice, "A mixed battle among the 8 strongest experts." "I agree." Jiang Yuji was the first to agree. "Me too. Me too." Sang Lan and the Evil Soul Remnant said at the same time. "Me too." Feng Hua and Bing Hong stood up. After the 4 agreed, there was a moment of silence. Tian did not speak, and Xinyuan Yunsong would not either. Cher and Lian Wui were also looking at Tian. "Wui." At this time, Xian Zongfeng's voice was heard, shouting towards Lian Wui. Lian Wui hesitated for a second, but nodded in agreement. Xian Zongfeng was her teacher, after all, and she did not want to go against him. Only Tian and the other 2 were left. If Tian didn't speak, the other 2 wouldn't either. "Tian, it's your turn." Jiang Lai had an evil smile on his face as he looked at Tian. He looked calm, as if he was not worried that Tian would refuse. Alliance Leader Jiang. Tian raised his head to look at Jiang Lai with a fierce look in his eyes and said in a loud voice, "I can agree to your proposal, but I have one condition." "What condition? Let's hear it." Jiang Lai raised an eyebrow and smiled. "I want one of your swords." Tian's reaction was also calm, and his voice was flat. "A sword?" Jiang Lai's expression changed, and he asked, "What sword?" Chapter 2006. The Inkjade Dragon Sword. That was what Tian wanted. The reason why he wanted the Inkjade Dragon Sword was because Jian Qingqi's soul was imprisoned in the sword. Tian had wanted to ask Gong Sun Xingji to make this request to Jiang Lai after the Evil Edge sword duel. However, he had suddenly changed his mind. Tian had overestimated the power of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Judging by how Jiang Lai was forcing Gong Sun Xingji to change the rules of the duel, Jiang Lai did not think much of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Gong Sun Xingji's influence would not allow Jiang Lai to hand over the Inkjade Dragon Sword. Fortunately, there was a great opportunity in front of Tian to make a request to Jiang Lai. Tian would not let go of such an opportunity. Although he knew that the battle royale would be very disadvantageous to him, he was willing to take the risk to save Jin Qingqi. The Ink Jade Dragon Sword. Jiang Lai's expression changed when he heard Nie Tian's words. He exclaimed in his heart. He had never expected that Nie Tian would make a request for the Ink Jade Dragon Sword. The Ink Jade Dragon Sword. The others had the same reaction when they heard Nie Tian's words. Their eyes flickered as if they could not believe that Nie Tian would make such a request. Nie Tian's gaze froze when he saw the crowd's reaction. It seemed that the Ink Jade Dragon Sword was very famous, and everyone knew of its existence. Then, the crowd came to their senses and exclaimed, "I can't believe Nie Tian actually wants the Ink Jade Dragon Sword. He's really asking for a lion's share." Yeah, the Ink Jade Dragon Sword is comparable to a sacred sword. Rumor has it that the Ink Jade Dragon Sword is also a sacred weapon. Nie Tian wants a sacred weapon as soon as he opens his mouth. He is indeed greedy. After hearing everyone's words, Nie Tian finally understood that the Ink Jade Dragon Sword was actually comparable to the sacred sword. It sounded like the Ink Jade Dragon Sword was also a Saint Tier sword. Gong Sun Sheng's expression suddenly changed. He believed that Jiang Lai would never agree to Nie Tian's conditions. What kind of treasure was the Ink Jade Dragon Sword? Jiang Lai would definitely not dare to risk it. Alliance leader Jiang, how about it? Are you willing to accept my conditions? Nie Tian smiled faintly. Since the Ink Jade Dragon Sword was so famous, he was relieved. The Ink Jade Dragon Sword itself was a priceless treasure. It was normal for Nie Tian to want it, and it would not arouse Jiang Lai's suspicions. Nie Tian, this condition of yours is really big. As expected of someone with the surname Nie. Jiang Lai smiled faintly and said, "The Ink Jade Dragon Sword is the only sword in the 9 major realms that can contend against the sacred sword. Your strength is too weak, and I'm afraid that you won't be able to control this sword, so I suggest you change your condition." Sure enough, Jiang Lai wasn't willing to risk the Ink Jade Dragon Sword, because this sword had a very special meaning to him. Alliance leader Jiang, whether or not I can control the Ink Jade Dragon Sword is my business. If you aren't willing to accept this condition, then I will also refuse to participate in the battle royale of the top 8. Let's just have a duel. Nie Tian smiled faintly, perfectly concealing the nervousness in his heart. Oh, Jiang Lai was stunned. After a few seconds of silence, he said, "Nie Tian, since you insist on having the Ink Jade Dragon Sword, then I will agree to it." Everyone was stunned when they heard Jiang Lai's words. Their faces were filled with surprise and doubt. No one expected that Jiang Lai would actually agree to Nie Tian's condition and was willing to hand over the Ink Jade Dragon Sword. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed. He forcefully suppressed the excitement in his heart and said, "Alliance leader Jiang, with your status, you won't go back on your word, right? As the alliance leader of the Sky Punishing Alliance, my words naturally carry enormous weight." Jiang Lai smiled faintly and then said, "However, if you want to obtain the Ink Jade Dragon Sword, you must fulfill a condition of mine." "What condition?" Nie Tian's gaze tightened. It seemed that obtaining the Ink Jade Dragon Sword was not easy. "It's very simple." The corner of Jiang Lai's mouth rose as he said, "As long as you can obtain the position of Sword Chief in an Evil Peak Sword Duel, the Ink Jade Dragon Sword is yours. If you can't obtain it, then I'm sorry." Jiang Lai's voice was not loud, but it caused everyone present to be stunned. The position of Sword Chief was a simple condition, but it was not simple at all. Right now, the contenders that everyone favored were Tsang Lan and the Evil Soul Remnant. As for Nie Tian, no one favored him for a long time. Jiang Lai wanted Nie Tian to obtain the Sword Chief because he wanted Nie Tian to gamble with his life. If Nie Tian did not obtain the Sword Chief, he could choose to withdraw at the crucial moment. However, if he agreed to Jiang Lai's condition, he would have to give it his all and obtain the Sword Chief. Otherwise, he would die in the battle royale of the top 8. Jiang Lai's condition seemed simple, but it was actually filled with killing intent. At this moment, everyone's gaze was on Nie Tian, waiting for him to make a decision. Of course, most people hoped that Nie Tian would agree to Jiang Lai's condition because this way, the battle royale of the top 8 would be even more exciting. Nie Tian's expression was very calm at this moment. He slowly lifted his head to look at Jiang Lai and indifferently said, "Alliance leader Jiang, I agree to your condition. However, when I obtain the sword chief, I want to see the ink jade dragon sword immediately." Seeing Nie Tian's carefree expression, Jiang Lai couldn't help but stare blankly for a moment. Then he laughed and said in a loud voice, "No problem. The ink jade dragon sword is with me. As long as you have the ability to become the sword chief, I'll give it to you with both hands." "Okay, it's a deal." The corner of Nie Tian's mouth curled into a determined smile. His entire being exuded a strong sense of confidence. He naturally knew that the reason why Jiang Lai proposed the position of sword chief was because he was afraid that he would withdraw midway in the battle royale of the top 8. However, he had never thought of withdrawing. He wanted the position of sword chief, and he wanted the ink jade dragon sword. Jiang Lai gloomily looked at Nie Tian and sinisterly said in his heart, "Nie Tian, if you want the ink jade dragon sword, you will need to be alive to obtain it. Let alone the others. Just Song Lan alone is an insurmountable mountain. Your puny life is fated to die in the battle royale of the sword chief contest." Nangong Duxio's gaze towards Nie Tian was also filled with cold, killing intent. He was originally worried that Nie Tian would be afraid to fight, but now that Jiang Lai had forced Nie Tian into a position where he had no choice but to fight, he was naturally very happy. Nangong Duxio had long been fearful of Nie Tian's rapid increase in strength. He felt threatened by Nie Tian's talent. If he allowed Nie Tian to continue growing, it would definitely not be a good thing. If Nie Tian could die at the hands of Song Lan, it would definitely be a great thing for the Sacred Parliament. Since Nie Tian agreed to the battle royale of the top 8, Xin Yuan Yunsong naturally agreed as well. After all, Nie Tian had the authority to make him do anything. Cher thought for a moment and finally nodded. The top 8 had all agreed to the battle royale. A new battle was about to begin. Chapter 2007. The battle royale for the top 8 was about to begin. Gongsun Sheng had already sent people to adjust the sword fighting arenas, merging the 4 sword fighting arenas into a huge one. 8 huge stone pillars stood in a circle in the middle of the huge sword fighting arena. "The 8 of you, please." A black-clothed judge appeared and shouted to Nie Tian and the others. "All right." Song Lan was the first to respond. He took the lead and soared into the sky like a sharp sword, landing steadily on one of the stone pillars. Just as Song Lan landed, the evil soul remnant, wind, fire, ice, great sword landed almost at the same time, appearing opposite Song Lan. Then, Cher and Xin Yuan Yunsong also entered the sword grounds. Nie Tian wasn't in a hurry. He waited for Lien Wui and Jiang Yuji to enter first. Yuji, but at this moment, Jiang Lai's voice suddenly sounded. "You don't have to fight anymore. Withdraw from this battle." Jiang Lai's words made the entire place fall silent. Everyone was stunned. They didn't expect Jiang Lai to ask Jiang Yuji to withdraw from the battle. "Father, this..." Jiang Yuji was also stunned. He looked at Jiang Lai in surprise. He didn't want to withdraw from the battle just like that. "Withdraw. They're too strong. You won't be able to withstand this kind of battle," Jiang Lai said calmly, but his tone was domineering. Jiang Yuji wanted to say something more, but when he saw the stern look in Jiang Lai's eyes, he swallowed the words that were on the tip of his tongue. He moved and left the sword grounds. Jiang Lai was indeed a cunning man. He saw through Nie Tian's killing intent, so he asked Jiang Yuji to withdraw from the battle in advance. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that as long as Jiang Yuji stepped into the sword grounds, Nie Tian wouldn't let him leave alive. "Wui, you should withdraw from the battle too." Right after Jiang Yuji left, Gongsun Sheng's voice sounded. He actually asked Lien Wui to withdraw from the battle as well. Lien Wui's delicate face stiffened. She was obviously unwilling to give up. It wasn't easy for her to enter the quarterfinals, but she was eliminated before the battle even started. Of course, she felt bad. At that moment, Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, "Miss Lien, the upcoming battles will definitely be beyond your imagination. You'd better not participate in them." "All right." Lien Wui sighed helplessly. She knew that Nye Tian and the others were too strong for her to contend against, and if she were to forcefully participate in the battle, her life would indeed be in danger. Jiang Yuji and Lien Wui withdrew from the battle, causing the crowd to sigh. Although the two of them were not experts, their presence made the battle a bit more exciting. Nye Tian didn't wait any longer. His figure flashed and directly stepped onto a stone pillar. 6 figures stood on the 6 towering pillars. Between them, a battle of the pinnacle was about to take place. Nye Tian, you're dead. Song Lan was the first to speak. He stared at Nye Tian with a cold, murderous look, and a strong killing intent surged in his eyes. At the same time, the evil soul remnant also fixed its eyes on Nye Tian. Its eyes were as cold as an eagle's, looking for the best opportunity to strike. On the other hand, Feng Hua and Bing Hong's faces were as calm as still water, as if the battle before them had nothing to do with them. Xinyuan Yinsong, you've completed one thing by agreeing to the battle of the top 8. What you need to do next is to try your best to survive. If you can't hold on any longer, take the initiative to withdraw. As long as you walk out of the sword field alive, you and I will not owe each other anything. Nye Tian shouted at Xinyuan Yinsong when he noticed the murderous intent of Song Lan and the evil soul remnant. Previously, when Xinyuan Yinsong lost to Nye Tian in the swordstone test, he had promised the latter 3 things. As long as he could walk out of the sword field alive, he would have completed the 3 things. All right, Xinyuan Yinsong agreed. Then he fixed his eyes on the evil soul remnant. He knew that his strength was far from Song Lan's, so he could only find a slightly weaker evil soul remnant. Nye Tian, I've always been curious. How could you do so many earth-shattering things with your strength? I'd like to see what's so special about you. How strong are you exactly? Song Lan said in a deep voice. A huge golden sword appeared in his hand. The sword light shot out for thousands of meters, illuminating the sky. The strangest thing was that the huge golden sword seemed to be made of liquid, surging into the shape of a huge sword. Oh my God, it's the sacred sword. The moment the huge golden sword appeared, everyone's eyes trembled. They couldn't believe their eyes. The sacred sword was a sacred sword in the 9 major realms. It was a famous sacred weapon. The Holy Parliament had been established for nearly 1,000,000 years. Apart from Song Lan, there was only one swordsman who could wield the sacred sword. It was an amazing thing that Song Lan could use the sacred sword as his weapon. For a swordsman, especially a powerful one, the stronger the sword in his hand, the stronger the sword will. Song Lan was a late-stage paramount god. His sword Dao had reached the advanced stage of sword and martial arts as one. With the sacred sword in his hand, his battle prowess was comparable to that of a peak paramount god. Song Lan truly lived up to the name of the sacred sword. His strength was definitely at the peak among swordsmen of the same generation. Nye Tian, I have the sacred sword in my hand. Can you block my sword? Song Lan's aura was as imposing as a mountain as he shouted coldly. His entire being was like a towering mountain standing on top of a mountain range. He was the ruler of this world, the ruler of everything, including Nye Tian's life. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed when he felt Song Lan's aura. Song Lan was very strong, much stronger than he had expected. To be honest, Nye Tian wasn't sure if he could block Song Lan's sword. The moment Song Lan unsheathed his sword, Gongsun Xingji and the others on the viewing platform were shocked. Song Lan's strength had exceeded everyone's expectations. Brother Gongsun, do you think Nye Tian can block Song Lan's sword? Nan Gong Duxiu, who was behind Gongsun Xingji, said in a strange tone. Of course he can. Gongsun Xingji's eyes darkened, but his expression became firm. He suddenly recalled the night when Nye Tian went berserk. He defeated him without using his sword. Gongsun Xingji didn't know what kind of power Nye Tian had awakened in his body at that time, but he believed that this power was still hidden in Nye Tian's body. Therefore, Nye Tian's strength was beyond anyone's imagination. Nye Tian, I really want to see if the legendary god fiend nascent embryo is really that strong, Zhang Lai's eyes were filled with murderous intent as he thought to himself. He didn't believe that Nie Tian could block Song Lan's sword unless Nie Tian used the power of the God Fiend Nascent Embryo. The God Fiend Nascent Embryo was a power that even Zhang Lai was afraid of. Nie Tian, the time for the sacred sword to claim your life has come. At this moment, Song Lan's voice resounded, following which the sacred sword in his hand danced wildly, causing the void to tremble. Endless sword intent gushed out and filled the air. It turned into a golden sword shadow that was 10,000 meters long, pressing down on Nie Tian. This sword was so powerful that it tore and destroyed everything in its path. Chapter 2008. In order to show how strong it was, and in order to kill Nie Tian in a single blow, Sage Sword Kanglin drew on all the power it could muster. A golden sword image that looked like a blazing sun smashed down toward Nie Tian. Ruinable. As the sword image descended, a terrifying rumbling sound filled the air. Everyone could sense the intense sword intent, and their eyes began to tremble. Song Lan. As expected of the sacred sword Song Lan. The power of this sword is too terrifying. I'm afraid that even a mountain range would not be able to withstand the destructive power of this sword. That's right. There's no way Nie Tian could stand up to something like that. Nie Tian is dead for sure. Even if he's stronger than he is, there's no way he could survive a blow from Sage Sword Kanglin. The crowd discussed in horror. They were all sure that Nie Tian would definitely die after the Blue Wave Sword. It had to be said that Kanglin's attack was so powerful that it caused heaven and earth to shake and shake. Compared to the golden sword image, Nie Tian looked so tiny that he couldn't even withstand a single blow. He was like a tiny boat in the middle of a raging storm. As the golden sword image descended, terrifying black magical symbols sprang up around Nie Tian, and his energy surged as he rose to the early paramount god level. Even so, there was still a huge gap between Nie Tian and Song Lan's strength. In the blink of an eye, defensive light sprang up around Nie Tian. Astral soul armor, astral soul shields, violet heavenly lightning armor, and sword intent shields. However, as the golden sword shadow descended from the sky, the shields around Nie Tian shattered with a resounding boom. In the end, the golden sword image slammed into Nie Tian's martial body, sending him tumbling backward and drowning in a wave of sword intent. When everyone saw what was happening, their faces went stiff. Although they were certain that Nie Tian would definitely die, they were still shocked when they saw Nie Tian's figure being drowned. Nie Tian was a terrifying genius, but he died just like that. It was inevitable that people would sigh endlessly. He died just like that. Song Lan looked at the billowing airwaves in front of him. The corners of his mouth curled up into an extremely disdainful smile. Coldly, he said, "So this is the so-called genius. What a disappointment." Killing Nie Tian with a single strike made Song Lan feel happy, but at the same time, there was a trace of disappointment in his heart. It seemed that Nie Tian was not as strong as he had imagined. So what if you're a monstrous genius? Faced with a true gap in strength, you'll still die without even a speck of dust remaining. Before the airwaves in the air dissipated, people had already begun to make sarcastic remarks. This attitude was completely different from when they had been flattering Nie Tian. Nie Tian only has the strength of an overgod after all. No matter how strange his strength is, it's impossible for him to fight against the supreme sacred sword Lord Song Lan. Most people echoed, as if Nie Tian's death was already a foregone conclusion. At this moment, the evil soul's remnant figure moved. It was actually preparing to leave. Its goal in participating in the evil edge sword competition was to kill Nie Tian. Now that Nie Tian was dead, it naturally wouldn't fight against an expert like Song Lan. Nie Tian, Xinyuan Yunsong's expression was very complicated. He was very upset that someone who had once defeated him had died just like that. Why? Cher's reaction was very strange and complicated. She was in a daze. She hadn't known Nie Tian for long, and she only knew his name. But at this moment, she felt inexplicably uncomfortable. This feeling was getting stronger and stronger and she couldn't bear it. When Tian was killed by Tsang Lan, Cher suddenly felt an emptiness in her heart. It was as if someone had suddenly dug out her heart. That feeling of emptiness actually made her want to cry. Cher didn't understand why she would suddenly feel so uncomfortable when she saw the scene of Tian being killed. She didn't know that even though Tian's shadow was no longer in her memory, there was a kind of unforgettable feeling that was engraved in her soul. Even if her memory disappeared, this unforgettable feeling would not disappear. Everyone present was certain that Tian was dead for sure. It was impossible for him to survive under the strangulation of Tsang Lan's sword will. Tsang Lan, this sword of yours is just SOSO. However, just when everyone was certain that Tian was dead, a rather mocking voice rang out in the midst of the raging sword will in the sky. Tian. The crowd was stunned at first, but then they recognized that the voice belonged to Tian. Tian actually didn't die. When everyone realized this, they all put on the most shocked expression they had ever had in their lives. Originally, everyone was certain that Tian had died under Tsang Lan's sword shadow. But the shocking thing was that Tian didn't die. He was still alive. Impossible. Tsang Lan's eyes darkened, and he couldn't help but exclaim. His eyes were filled with disbelief. How could he have imagined that Tian was actually still alive? Just as Tsang Lan's exclamation faded, a blood-red figure appeared in the sky. His entire body was stained with blood, but his aura was extremely powerful, especially his eyes, which were like those of an evil wolf, staring fixedly at Tsang Lan. "You, how could you not be dead?" Tsang Lan immediately reacted, and he roared in anger like a wild beast. His sword had clearly destroyed all of Tian's defenses. Tian's physical body was exposed to his sword will. How could it possibly withstand the sharp sword will's strangulation? Tsang Lan was very clear about that kind of power. Not even the body of a divine beast could withstand it, let alone a human's martial body. Unless Tian's physical body had reached the level of a pinnacle paramount god. However, Tian was clearly only at the level of a lord. Even after activating the forbidden technique, he could barely reach the level of an early-stage paramount god. His strength was so weak, how could he possibly reach the level of a pinnacle paramount god? Could it be that he was a monster? At that moment, the corner of Tian's mouth curled up into a strange smile. His body trembled slightly, and he wiped off the blood on his body. His face showed not fear, but a strong desire to fight. He had been able to withstand Tsang Lan's sword because of his strong martial body. Of course, the defense he had activated earlier had greatly weakened the impact of Tsang Lan's sword will. When the pure sword will hit his martial body, he could feel all of his meridians being destroyed in an instant, and then recovering in an instant. The excruciating pain was almost unbearable. His martial body was slightly weaker than a pinnacle paramount god, but his martial body had extremely strong regenerative abilities. Combined with the 3 great forbidden techniques, as long as the sword will didn't kill him directly, he could recover in an instant. Back when he had fused the 3 great forbidden techniques, it had been a process of destruction and creation. He could even sense that the forbidden technique runes in his body had actually shown signs of strengthening after he had endured Tsang Lan's sword intent. "Tsang Lan, since you want to fight, I'll fight with you." Tian stared coldly at Tsang Lan. With a low roar, the sword will surge from his body, making him look like a giant sword that stood between heaven and earth. Chapter 2009. Tian stood high up in the sky, his body surging with power. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. Tsang Lan's previous attack had caused serious damage to his martial constitution, but he had the earth vein source, which allowed him to recover instantly. As long as it was not a fatal injury to his Yuan Meridian or primordial spirit, Tian could recover quickly. This was the most terrifying part of his martial constitution. The fusion of the demonic aura with the earth vein source not only increased Tian's strength, but also gave him the ability to recover instantly. Although the previous attack had injured Tian, it made him realize something very strange. Song Lan's sword could actually strengthen the forbidden skill rune in his body. Tian didn't know why this was happening. He had fought many swordsmen before, but none of their sword intents had been able to affect his forbidden magic runes. It seemed that Song Lan's sword was very strange and had a very terrifying power. Tian, do you really think that you are a match for me just because you barely managed to block my attack? You are too funny, Song Lan said coldly, his eyes filled with murderous intent. Song Lan was very unhappy that he had failed to kill Tian with his sword strike. Now he was truly enraged. Don't be too arrogant. Maybe you will soon find out that the one who is really funny is you. Tian looked at Song Lan. The sword in his body bloomed to the extreme, making him look like he was filled with murderous intent. Damn it! Song Lan let out a furious roar. Gripping his sword with both hands, he swung it down with all his might. In an instant, a torrential wave of sword intent came crashing down. Endless sharp sword chi wreaked havoc in the air and pressed down on Tian. At this moment, everyone felt a terrifying pressure. This was not because of Song Lan's strength, but because the holy sword in his hand was releasing a weak saint energy that permeated the air, causing a sense of pressure to the crowd. Seeing this, Tian slashed out with Starlight Sky Slash. The sword in his body roared and turned into a mighty sword shadow. He was going to fight Song Lan head-on. He had already discovered that if he were to blindly defend, it would only put him in a more dangerous and passive position. To defeat Song Lan, Tian's only chance was to fight him head-on. Look, Tian actually wants to fight with Song Lan. Is he crazy? Someone saw this scene, and his eyes couldn't help but tremble as he screamed. Tian has a death wish. Even if he's an early paramount god, there's no way he can fight Sage Sword Azure Wave head-on. Obviously, Tian was committing suicide. Generally speaking, it was rare for paramount gods to be able to fight people who were one minor level higher than them. To be able to fight people who were 2 minor levels higher than them was like a phoenix feather or a Qilin horn. Tian was only an early godlord and had relied on heaven-defying methods to push himself to the level of an early paramount god. Now that he was fighting Kanglin, it was a bit risky. That said, he knew that it was a risk he had to take. It was his only chance to defeat Song Lan. Tian, you want to fight me with your current sword intent? You're courting death. Seeing Tian's actions, Song Lan revealed a sinister smile and laughed maniacally. Boom! Just as Song Lan's voice fell, the 2 gigantic sword shadows finally collided head-on. Suddenly, a shocking wave of sword essence appeared and spread in all directions. Tian's body trembled violently, and he was forced to retreat thousands of meters. Song Lan, however, stood firmly in place like a mountain. Clearly, Tian was much weaker in a head-on clash of sword intent. Regaining his balance, he coughed up a mouthful of blood, and his flushed complexion immediately took a turn for the better. Song Lan was strong, and it would be very difficult for Tian to defeat him in a head-on fight. When Song Lan saw that Tian wasn't dead and had only suffered some minor injuries, he was even more furious. He was Song Lan, someone who could wield a holy sword, and yet he couldn't even kill someone who was far weaker than him. That was a disgrace to him. Thinking of this, the killing intent in Song Lan's eyes intensified. His aura suddenly changed, and a completely different kind of power surged out of him, causing his sword intent to skyrocket. Song Lan's aura is getting stronger. The crowd couldn't help but exclaim. Up in the sky, Gong Sun Sheng and the others' expressions changed again and again. The fact that Tian had blocked 2 of Song Lan's swords had ignited hope in Gong Sun Sheng's heart. But when he saw that Song Lan's aura was still skyrocketing, he couldn't help but feel nervous. He was very curious about how strong Song Lan really was. Tian, it's not bad that you could take 2 of my swords, but it's time for this fight to end. My next sword will take your life. At this time, Song Lan's figure suddenly rose up, standing in the endless sword intent. He was like a god of sword, killing and destroying everything. Tian felt the change in Song Lan's aura, and his face darkened slightly. He knew that the next sword would be even more terrifying than the previous two. With this thought in mind, Nietian didn't hesitate at all. Suddenly, balls of terrifying dark power surged out of his body, wrapping him up like a dark vortex. The dark power was the divine demon power. At this time, Nietian had to use the divine demon sword essence. The instant the power of the fiend gods was released, everyone felt their souls tremble as if they had sensed danger. They didn't know what kind of power Nietian was releasing at this time, and why it looked so terrifying. It's this kind of power again. Gongsun Sheng looked at Nietian, his eyes trembling, and he exclaimed in his heart. He didn't know that this was the divine demon power, but on the night when Nietian went berserk, he felt the same power. But the difference was that the dark aura on Nietian's body was much weaker than that night. When Nietian lost control, all 9,000 divine demon power had been awakened. But now, not all of them had been awakened in his body, so it was much weaker. Divine demon nascent embryo. Jianglai also looked at Nietian, his eyes trembling, and an unconcealable killing intent surged in them. He didn't expect Nietian to be able to use the power of the divine demon nascent embryo. Sensing this, Jianglai's expression changed, and he seemed to be a little worried. Sanglan also felt the unusual aura on Nietian's body, but his killing intent was strong, and he didn't care about anything else. He slashed down with the holy sword, and suddenly, an endless sword bloomed. A dazzling golden sword shadow appeared in the air, like the golden light of the sun, and rushed towards Nietian. At the same time, Nietian also moved, and the starry heaven pierced the sky. The divine demon sword essence shot up into the sky, and a sword shadow with a dark aura appeared, as if a divine demon had descended and a terrifying aura pressed down on the sky. The might of the saint sword and the fiend god sword intent collided, causing the entire world to seem tiny. Chapter 2010. These two people are so strong. Everyone was shocked to see the scene in the sky. Both Sanglan and Nietian's battle prowess exceeded everyone's expectations. This battle was even more exciting than they had expected. Sanglan and Nietian, one above and one below, their sword momentum surging like a mountain. Both of them were staring at each other with the coldest eyes. Rumble! In the next moment, under the attentive gazes of countless people, the two terrifying sword shadows finally collided with each other. Boundless sword intent surged violently, and the void became oppressive and gloomy as if it would collapse at any moment. Terrifying waves of air rippled out in the sky, as if the whole world was trembling. The power of the sword collision between Nietian and Sanglan was so great that it was almost as powerful as a battle between peak paramount gods. Everyone was shocked, and they couldn't believe that this was a battle between two young swordsmen. Rumble! Ear-piercing noises could be heard in the air. The two sword shadows collided and devoured each other, trying to destroy each other. However, this kind of power was too terrifying, and it was impossible to determine the winner in an instant. Nietian and Sanglan's figures were submerged in the endless waves of air. People could only see the sword light, but couldn't see the two of them. The other four people on the sword field were watching, and had no intention of making a move. Phantasm Soul Remnant originally thought that Sanglan could easily kill Nietian, but who knew that this battle would be so terrifying? Fortunately, Sanglan was there, otherwise Phantasm Soul Remnant couldn't be sure that he could kill Nietian. After a while, the air waves in the air gradually dissipated, and Nietian and Sanglan's figures appeared. At this moment, both of them were not in a good state. Nietian's body was covered in blood, and he was obviously seriously injured. Sanglan's face was pale, and there was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. He was also injured. Everyone could see that Nietian had been seriously injured in the battle just now. If other swordsmen were to suffer such heavy injuries, it would be difficult for them to even survive, let alone continue fighting. However, Nietian had the Earth Vein Source, which could provide him with a powerful life force. As long as it wasn't a fatal injury, he would be able to recover quickly. Although Sanglan's injuries were light, His martial physique was not as strong as Nye Tion's, and his recovery ability was weak. Therefore, in the confrontation just now, Nye Tion seemed to have suffered a great loss, but in reality, the entire battle situation had turned in his favor. Nye Tion, why are you so strong? Sang Lan looked at Nye Tion with a gloomy expression, a hint of embarrassment on his face. It was supposed to be an easy battle, but it turned out to be like this. This made Sang Lan very angry. He was Saint Sword Kanglin. He should have killed Nye Tion with a single slash. How could he have allowed Nye Tion to persist until now and even injure him? Sang Lan couldn't understand all this. Nye Tion's body trembled, and the blood on his body was washed away. The wounds on his body healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. He looked at Sang Lan and said faintly, "Sang Lan, didn't you say that I was very funny? Now you should know that the real funny one is you." Damn it! Sang Lan was provoked and immediately growled. He immediately swung the Saint Sword in his hand again, and a huge sword shadow slashed at Nye Tion. Nye Tion was not afraid and also swung his sword. The sword shadow whistled and blocked Sang Lan's sword. How is this possible? When the crowd saw this, their faces were filled with shock, and they cried out in shock. What is Sang Lan doing? Why is his sword essence getting weaker and weaker? It doesn't seem to be as strong as before. Why is Nye Tion getting stronger and stronger? The crowd was confused. After the fierce battle, just now, Sang Lan's aura had weakened. On the other hand, Nye Tion, who had been seriously injured several times, was getting stronger and stronger. This was too strange. No one could understand what was happening. What was going on? Logically speaking, Nye Tion's strength should be getting weaker, and his aura should be getting weaker and weaker. Why was it getting stronger and stronger? No one knew that Nye Tion had the Terra vein source in his body, so his life force was very strong. And the reason why Nye Tion's aura was getting stronger was not because of others, but because of Sang Lan. Every time Sang Lan's sword fell, he would cause serious damage to Nye Tion. But at the same time, his sword essence was also absorbed by Nye Tion, making the forbidden skill rune in Nye Tion's body stronger. At the beginning of the battle, Nye Tion noticed that Sang Lan's sword essence was very strange. It could strengthen the forbidden skill rune in his body. Because of the strengthening of the forbidden skill rune, Nye Tion's aura not only did not weaken, but also became stronger and stronger. Nye Tion himself did not know why Sang Lan's sword essence could affect the forbidden skill rune. As for Sang Lan, it was because his sword essence was absorbed by Nye Tion that his aura became weaker. As for Sang Lan, the gap between Nye Tion and Sang Lan's strength was slowly narrowing. Nye Tion even felt that if he absorbed more of Sang Lan's sword essence, the forbidden skill rune could even be upgraded, and his strength might also increase again. Why? Why can't I kill you? Sang Lan was completely enraged. He roared and stabbed with his holy sword several times, but all of them were easily blocked by Nye Tion. Sang Lan, it's time for me to fight back. At this time, the corner of Nye Tion's mouth curled up slightly, and a strong killing intent flashed in his eyes. Sang Lan's current attack was no longer a threat to Nye Tion. Next, it was time for Nye Tion to fight back. As soon as his voice fell, Nye Tion slashed with Starlight Heaven Slash. A starlight sword shadow appeared, and like a collapsing mountain, it smashed down on Sang Lan. Sang Lan was forced to retreat again and again, looking extremely embarrassed. Nye Tion had the upper hand with his sword. He immediately stabbed with his sword, and a terrifying sword light appeared in the air. As Sang Lan retreated, wounds appeared on his body. His whole body was dripping with blood, and his life was constantly flowing out. What's going on? Am I seeing things? Sang Lan is actually being beaten by Nye Tion to the point where he can't even fight back? The crowd's eyes trembled, and some even suspected that their eyes were playing tricks on them. Sang Lan's aura is getting weaker and weaker. If this continues, he will be killed by Nye Tion. The crowd's view began to change, and the scales of victory were tipping in Nye Tion's favor. On the viewing platform high up in the sky, Gong Sun Sheng and the others were watching with their eyes wide open. Nye Tion's reversal was too dramatic, and no one could understand what was going on. At this moment, Nangong Dushio's expression was extremely ugly, and he kept shouting in his heart, "Songlan, you piece of trash, what are you doing? You are a person who can control a sacred sword. How can you not even kill a puny Nye Tian?" How could he know that Songlan had already done his best? At this moment, Songlan's mood was on the verge of collapse. Nye Tian, who was far weaker than him, had become stronger after being severely injured by him several times. Anyone who encountered such a situation would go crazy. Songlan prepared to die. At this moment, Nye Tian's eyes suddenly turned cold, and his entire body's sword intent instantly surged. Starlight heaven slashed down from the sky, and a fatal sword shadow appeared, slashing towards Songlan. Chapter 2011. Nye Tian could feel that Songlan's aura was getting weaker and weaker. As long as his sword landed, Songlan would definitely die. The terrifying and deadly sword shadow descended from the sky, and Songlan felt an immense pressure. His eyes narrowed as he sensed a genuine killing intent, and he could smell the arrival of death. He had never dreamed that he would die at the hands of Nye Tian. However, just as the fatal sword strike was about to land, Nye Tian's murderous eyes suddenly changed. They became dull and lifeless. In an instant, the sword shadow in the sky lost its support and weakened instantly. "Huh? What's going on?" Songlan was taken aback by the sudden turn of events, but he reacted quickly and blocked the fatal sword strike with his sword. Songlan steadied himself and saw that Nye Tian was standing still like a piece of wood. His eyes were dull and lifeless. Everyone was stunned when they saw this scene. They did not know what had happened to Nye Tian. What's wrong with Nye Tian? He had the chance to kill Songlan. Why did he stop? It's such a great opportunity to kill Songlan, but Nye Tian stopped. What a pity. Look, something's wrong with Nye Tian. He doesn't have any aura at all. It's as if he's being controlled. He was being controlled. At this moment, Nye Tian was indeed being controlled, and the person controlling him was none other than the other swordsman on the sword field, the evil soul remnant. The phantasm soul had long since realized that Nye Tian's psychic power and soul were far stronger than that of an ordinary person's, and that he had an incomparably tough temperament. Furthermore, he had sensed the existence of the divine patterns. Therefore, even if he used his illusory sword intent on Nye Tian, the chances of success wouldn't be very high. The evil soul remnant did not make a move when Nye Tian and Songlan were fighting, because he was waiting for a suitable opportunity. When Nye Tian was preparing to kill Songlan just now, all his attention was focused on Songlan. He did not care about the evil soul's remnant life, so he fell into the illusion of the evil soul. "Songlan, what are you waiting for? Hurry up and kill him." At this time, the voice of the evil soul sounded, urging Songlan to kill Nye Tian. At this moment, Nye Tian was being controlled by the evil soul's remnant life. He had no defense at all, and his martial body was also in a relaxed state. A casual swing of Songlan's sword would be enough to kill him. Songlan was taken aback for a moment before he reacted. The corners of his mouth curled into a cold smile. Sword aura arose from his body, and he slashed at Nye Tian in a frenzy. Despicable. At this moment, another voice rang out, and a sword shadow appeared, blocking Songlan's fatal attack for Nye Tian. The figure flickered and stood in front of Nye Tian. It was none other than Xianyuan Yinsong. Although Xianyuan Yinsong did not like Nye Tian, he remembered that he was on the same side as Nye Tian. Moreover, he could not bear to see the evil soul remnant and Songlan working together to kill Nye Tian. Xianyuan Yinsong had thought that it was just an accident that he had lost to Nye Tian on the sword stone. However, after the fierce battle just now, he realized that Nye Tian's strength was far beyond his own, and that Nye Tian could even kill him within a second. He could not believe that Nye Tian could be so powerful. "Get lost!" Songlan roared when he saw Xianyuan Yinsong standing in front of him. He struck out with his sword, but it was still blocked by Xianyuan Yinsong. Songlan's strength was, of course, far superior to Xianyuan Yinsong. However, he was seriously injured, so it was difficult for him to deal with Xianyuan Yunsong. "Nye Tian, is it? If that's the case, then let me kill you." At this moment, another voice rang out. Immediately after, a fierce sword intent whizzed out, morphed into a sword shadow, and shot towards Nye Tian. This sword shadow was as cold as ice, and wherever it passed through the void, many icicles appeared. "You are not a good person to make a move at this time." Almost at the same time, a clear voice sounded, and then a crimson sword essence gushed out, turned into a shield in the air, and wrapped around Nye Tian. Bang! The cold sword shadow landed on the crimson shield, and after a muffled sound, it broke into pieces. "Little girl, I don't want to kill women. You'd better get out of my way." Fenghua Binghong looked at Cher with murderous eyes and said coldly. The person who wanted to kill Nye Tian was Fenghua Binghong. Originally, he didn't have any grudges with Nye Tian, but he felt something from Nye Tian, and that was a threat. Because of this threat, he wanted to kill Nye Tian. Fenghua Binghong was already a genius in sword principle, but compared to Nye Tian, he was still a long way off. He didn't allow people who were better than him to exist, so he wanted to kill Nye Tian. Unfortunately, Fenghua Binghong's fatal sword was blocked by Cher. In fact, Cher wanted to make a move earlier, but Xianyuan Yunsong was one step ahead of her. "You don't want to kill me, but I want to kill you," Cher smiled coldly, and her whole body was like an iceberg, releasing a cold chi. She didn't know why, but there was an impulse in her heart, and she had to protect Nye Tian. "If that's the case, then don't blame me." Fenghua Binghong's eyes darkened, and his whole body's sword essence burst out. Suddenly, a layer of frost appeared in the sky, and the space became bone-chilling. It's a boundary. The evil soul remnant felt the sword pressure coming from the space and immediately reacted. Fenghua Binghong opened a swordwell boundary. "Little girl, I'll give you one last chance. Back off." Fenghua Binghong said coldly, as if he really didn't want to kill the woman. But Cher didn't give in at all, and said, "You want to scare me off with a small swordwell boundary? Ridiculous." Cher had the meridians of 3 lives, so she was not afraid of any boundary. Moreover, she was wearing the Emperor of Hell's Saint garment, so she was not affected by Fenghua Binghong's boundary. Fenghua Binghong opened the boundary with the intention of scaring Cher off, but he didn't expect to be ridiculed, which made him very angry. "Since you want to die, then don't blame me." Fenghua Binghong's eyes darkened, and he suddenly stabbed out with his long sword. Suddenly, a cold chi appeared and turned into a huge icicle, blasting toward Cher. Cher wasn't afraid at all. Her figure moved, and the fallen god sword stabbed out. The sword will surged out like 1,000 feet of red and blocked Fenghua Binghong's sword. The Windfire Iceman was much more powerful than Shui, but his level of swordsmanship was weaker than Shui-er's. Furthermore, Shui was wearing the mysterious underworld emperor's sacred robe, so the two of them were evenly matched. Xianyuan Yunsong blocked Song Lan, and Cher blocked Fenghua Binghong. The battle seemed to be a stalemate. "Looks like I have to do it myself." However, at this time, the evil soul remnant sneered, and the corner of his mouth rose into a cold smile, and his eyes were full of killing intent. He didn't want to do it, but now he had no choice but to kill Nye Tian himself. Nye Tian was hit by his sword of incubus, and had lost the ability to resist. To him, Nye Tian was a piece of fat meat on the chopping board, ready to be slaughtered. Chapter 2012. The evil soul remnant had a sinister smile on its face. The black sword in its hand released an extremely cold aura as it walked towards Nye Tian step by step. "Not good. That guy is going to attack Nye Tian." When the crowd saw the scene in the sky, their eyes violently trembled and they cried out in alarm. Nye Tian was currently under the evil soul remnant's sword intent illusion and could not retaliate at all. If the evil soul remnant wanted to kill him, he could only obediently accept his death. Everyone's nerves were stretched taut at this moment. They did not even dare to breathe loudly. Gongsun Shengji, Guiwu Kwangsha, and the others' hearts jumped to their throats as they looked at the evil soul remnant with trembling eyes. They were worried about Nye Tian's situation. Although Nie Tian was at the juncture of life and death, Gongsun Xingji and Guiwu Kuang Sha could not save him because he was currently on the sword stage. No one could intervene in the battle. Jiang Lai and Nangong Duxiu also stared at Nie Tian and the evil soul remnant with blazing eyes. They were clearly looking forward to the scene where the evil soul remnant would kill Nie Tian with a single sword strike. On the sword stage, the evil soul remnant was less than 100 meters away from Nie Tian. Its pair of malicious eyes released a cold and gloomy aura and heavy, killing intent. At the same time, inside Nie Tian's spiritual sense space, he felt like he had fallen into a swamp. The more he struggled, the deeper he sank. Illusion, the evil soul remnant's sword intent, created an extremely terrifying illusion that completely controlled Nie Tian's spiritual sense. Nie Tian, wake up! At this time, Fat Cat was desperately shouting, but his voice could not affect Nie Tian's spiritual sense at all. Nie Tian's eyes were dazed. He stood in the same place with a lifeless expression. His figure was like a withered leaf in a gale that could wither at any time. Damn it! The little fat cat sensed the impending danger and could not help but let out a low growl. Its blue eyes flickered as it hardened its heart and said, Nie Tian, this is the last way to save you. I can only say sorry. As soon as it finished speaking, the fat cat's body moved, and 6 tails stretched out from its back. Furthermore, these 6 tails were growing larger and larger as they spread through the air. It turned out that fat cat had grown a 6th tail. Nie Tian, I'm stirring up huge waves in the fiend god ocean to attack your fiend god nascent embryo. I'm using this method to awaken you. The fat cat thought to itself. Immediately, its 6 tails, like 6 giant snakes, plunged deep into the sea of demons and gods, stirring wildly. In the sea of gods and demons, monstrous waves rose as the power of gods and demons was released in the origin embryo space, wreaking havoc. At the same time, Nie Tian was attacked. He suddenly felt a sharp pain in his body. Puff! At this moment, his body couldn't help but tremble, and then he spat out a mouthful of blood. It was also at this moment that his dull eyes regained their clarity, releasing a bright light. At the same time, a black blade attacked from the void. Its aura wasn't strong, but it was extremely swift and fierce, with strong killing intent. Nie Tian suddenly felt the killing intent, and almost instinctively, a majestic star force surged out, and a starlight shield appeared around his body. Bang! In the next instant, the sword's shadow fell, heavily smashing on the starlight shield. Nie Tian's body was directly sent flying, leaving a bloody trail in the air. Nie Tian. Cher was fighting with wind, fire, and ice. When she saw Nie Tian being sent flying, she couldn't help but cry out, "Little girl, you dare to be distracted while fighting with me." Feng Hua Bing sneered and slashed out with his sword. A huge icicle appeared in the void. Outside the icicle, there was a layer of frightening flame aura surging. Cher was stunned for a moment, and her reaction was slightly slow. She was immediately hit by the icicle, and her figure was sent flying. Her figure was still in midair, and a majestic sword intent surged out behind her. The blood-red sword intent condensed into a pair of wings, and she immediately stabilized her body. Wind, fire, and ice frowned when he saw this, and he said in surprise, "What is that black robe you're wearing? It can actually block my ice flame sword intent." The sword intent that wind, fire, and ice cultivated was called the ice flame sword intent. It was very powerful, and it was a kind of sword intent that had both ice and fire attributes. Ice and fire were originally 2 extreme attributes, but they could be merged into one in wind, fire, and ice's sword intent, allowing his sword intent to have both the coldness of ice and the heat of fire at the same time. If an ordinary martial artist was hit by the ice flame sword intent, they would have to endure the torment of both ice and fire. With wind, fire, and ice's current strength, a single sword strike was enough to threaten a late-stage Paramount God, and any martial artist below the mid-stage Paramount God level could basically be killed with a single strike. But his sword strike just now had struck Cher head-on, and she wasn't injured at all. It was too strange. He could see that the reason Cher could resist the ice flame sword intent head-on wasn't because of her strong martial body, but because of the black robe she was wearing. It was that black robe that had blocked most of the ice flame sword intent's attack for Cher. Otherwise, she would have been seriously injured, if not dead. How can a mere ice flame sword intent break through the power of the Saint Garment? Cher replied coldly, steadying her body. She was wearing the Underworld Emperor's sacred robe, which was a true sacred tool. Even though she couldn't unleash the full power of the Underworld Emperor's sacred robe, it was more than enough to resist the ice flame sword essence of wind, fire, and ice. Are you all right, Nye Tian? At this moment, Shui turned to look at Nye Tian, and she couldn't help but be surprised to find that he had regained his soul awareness. I'm fine. Nye Tian steadied himself and smiled faintly. Even though he was covered in blood, his eyes were filled with an intense desire to fight. This is impossible. Across from Nye Tian, Phantasm Remnant couldn't help but shriek. How did you break through my nightmare sword? Never in his wildest dreams could he have imagined that Nye Tian would be able to wake up from the nightmare sword. That was something that had never happened before. Phantasm Remnant was most proud of his nightmare sword. Even a peak paramount god would have a hard time waking up from it. He had even used the incubus sword to kill a peak paramount god. However, Nye Tian was only an early paramount god, and yet he had broken through the nightmare sword in such a short time. It was simply too bizarre. Phantasm Remnant, it's time for you and me to fight, Nye Tianling said with a cold smile, his eyes flashing with killing intent. But as soon as he took a step forward and activated his key meridians, his face fell. What's going on? My key meridians are injured? Nye Tian, just now, in order to wake you up from the illusion, I forcefully attacked your fiend god nascent embryo. As a result, your key meridians were also attacked, and you suffered some injuries. The little fat cat's voice sounded out, explaining. When Fat Cat had woken up Nye Tian, it had not only attacked his fiend god nascent embryo, but also his key meridians. Nye Tian's eyes flickered. Things weren't looking good for him. Even with the Earth String essence, he couldn't instantly heal the damage to his key meridians. Chapter 2013. Realizing that his Yuan meridians were injured, Nye Tian's expression changed, and he became worried. His Yuan meridians were not greatly affected, but the God Fiend origin embryo was attacked, and he was unable to use the God Fiend Sword Intent. The God Fiend Sword Intent was one of Nye Tian's strongest trump cards. If he could not use it, his battle power would be greatly reduced. The Evil Soul Remnant life was very cautious, and it perfectly captured the change in Nye Tian's expression. It was puzzled, and it did not know what had happened to Nye Tian. On the viewing platform, Gongsun Sheng saw that Nye Tian had woken up from the illusion, and he finally relaxed. However, Jiang Lai and Nangong Dushio's expressions were extremely unsightly. They were even more worried that Nye Tian had not died in such a situation. Time and time again, Nye Tian's performance had amazed them, but it also made them feel fearful and threatened. Nye Tian was too terrifying, and he was slowly subverting Jiang Lai and the others' understanding of the martial Tao. As one of the apex experts of the 9 major domains, Jiang Lai had seen countless outstanding people, but none of them could compare to Nye Tian. Nye Tian, your God Fiend origin embryo has been attacked, and it is very unstable. If you continue to fight, you might cause fatal damage to the God Fiend origin embryo. Fat Cat reminded Nye Tian. Nye Tian frowned, and he said solemnly, I've already come this far. How can I back out? At this stage in the Evil Edge Sword competition, Nye Tian had even defeated Sacred Sword Kanglin. He would not be willing to back out now. He could ignore the position of Sword Chief, but he could not ignore Jian Qingqi's life and death. He had agreed with Jiang Lai that he could only obtain the Ink Jade Dragon Sword if he obtained the position of Sword Chief. Therefore, Nye Tian could not give up at this time. Even if he had to risk injuring his God Fiend origin embryo, he had to continue fighting. Fat Cat's expression was tense. He knew Nye Tian's character very well. Even at the very last moment, he would never admit defeat. After thinking for a moment, Fat Cat said to Nye Tian, Finish this quickly. Tian could not maintain his current state for much longer. If the talisman within him ran out of energy and his strength returned to early over God, there really would be no hope at all. Tian, I admit that your strength has exceeded my expectations, but you can't win this battle. The evil soul remnant cold spoke, and then a terrifying sword aura surged from its body. Waves of black sword intent spread out, causing the surrounding space to darken. Wretch Soul Discarnate was a mid-paramount god and had mastered the art of sword and martial arts. Therefore, even if his nightmare sword couldn't kill Tian, he was confident that he could defeat Tian. Furthermore, he could sense that Tian's aura was very weak and that he had sustained significant injuries. If he still couldn't kill Tian under these circumstances, then he would be the leader of the 13 reverse scale spikes. Without the slightest hesitation, the evil soul remnant stabbed out with his wretch soul sword, creating a black image that looked like an enormous black serpent that lunged toward Tian. Frowning, Tian unleashed the starry heaven slash, sending sword light shooting out thousands of meters in all directions. Rumble. Two sword shadows collided in the void, emitting a violent rumble. Heaven and earth turned solemn, and the weather changed. Tian was sent tumbling backward several thousand meters, coughing up a mouthful of blood. His vital meridians were injured, and every time he tried to circulate them, his martial body would be severely damaged. Even the regenerative powers of the Earth String essence couldn't heal him instantly. Not being able to use the Fiend God Sword intent also weakened Tian's battle prowess. He was at a great disadvantage in a head-on clash with the evil soul remnant. Tian, you're already an arrow at the end of its flight. Just accept your death. The evil soul remnant sneered, and its aura became even more violent. The wretch soul sword stirred up waves of sword intent in the air as it bombarded toward Tian. Tian was forced to retreat again and again. Glaring wounds appeared on his body, and blood gushed out from all over his body. But Tian was able to stand firm every time, and the look in his eyes didn't change in the slightest. They were as sharp and determined as ever. Tian, let's see how much longer you can hold out. The evil soul remnant had the upper hand, and its sword came down again and again. Tian could only take the beating without being able to fight back. The injuries on his body worsened, and the air was filled with the stench of blood. The crowd couldn't help but be shocked at the tragic scene in the sky. They weren't shocked by the evil soul remnant's strength, but by Tian's tenacity. Tian is really too strong. If it weren't for the evil soul remnant, he would have killed Kanglin's sacred sword by now. Now that he's fighting the evil soul remnant, he can still hold out until now. How terrifying. I thought Kanglin was strong, but it turns out that Tian is even stronger than him. Even if Tian can't beat the evil soul remnant now, he's definitely the most terrifying person in the top 8. Why does Tian still want to fight? If he admits defeat now, he can still keep his life. If he continues, he'll definitely be killed by the evil soul remnant. Could it be that Tian is fighting for the Ink Jade Dragon Sword? That's too stupid. Although the Ink Jade Dragon Sword is good, he can't lose his life for it. The crowd discussed among themselves, and they couldn't understand why Tian was still fighting. But now, they all understood that the most terrifying person in the top 8 wasn't Kanglin's sacred sword, but Tian. Even if Tian was being suppressed by the evil soul remnant, his battle prowess was recognized by everyone. Tian died. The evil soul remnant's sword slashed down again and again, but Tian still stood there. Even though his aura was weak, he was still alive. This made the evil soul remnant even more furious, and his expression became even more vicious. Tian was barely holding on, and his eyes were bloodshot, but he was still as resolute and fierce as ever. The evil soul remnant was strong, but he, Tian, would never admit defeat even at the last moment. Tian. Cher couldn't help exclaiming when she sensed Tian's aura weakening. But her strength wasn't strong enough, and she could only barely block Feng Binghong's attacks. Little girl, this is the second time you've been distracted. Don't blame me for this. At the same time, Feng Hua Binghong's voice resounded, and he slashed out with his sword. Instantly, a chilling aura swept over, covering the sky and covering the earth. Shui raised her sword in an attempt to block the attack. However, she suddenly felt the space around her sinking down. Then, her body was actually frozen solid. Humph. Even if I can't kill you, I can still control you. Feng Hua Binghong sneered. His attack wasn't to kill Cher, but to control her. Then, Feng Hua Binghong's gaze turned to Nie Tian, and his eyes revealed undisguised murderous intent. Nie Tian was simply too powerful. The wind, flame, ice magnanimity had made up their minds to kill him. Chapter 2014. Nie Tian was already struggling under the frenzied attacks of the evil soul remnant. Now that ice, wind, fire, and ice were attacking him, he was in a life-and-death crisis. Be careful! The crowd couldn't help but shriek when they saw the huge sword shadow descending on Nie Tian. Nie Tian was already in a very dangerous situation. If he were to face the full power of wind, fire, and ice, he would be seriously injured even if he didn't die. Nie Tian, frozen, Shui, let out a cry of alarm upon seeing that Nie Tian was in danger. However, there was nothing she could do and could only watch helplessly. Nie Tian's eyes were gloomy, and his brain was working quickly. At this moment between life and death, he had several choices to save his life. The safest method was to let Sakura come out and block the fatal sword strike of wind, fire, and ice for him. Among the opponents that Nie Tian was facing, Songlan was no longer a threat. He was always entangled by Xinyuan Yinsong. The wind, fire, ice, great elder, and the phantasm soul remnant were his greatest threats. Both of them were extremely powerful, and any one of them had the strength to fight Nie Tian head-on when he was at his peak, not to mention that the two of them were teaming up to fight Nie Tian, who was in an extremely poor state. Although they were strong, they were still a little weak compared to Sakura. As long as Sakura appeared, he could easily kill wind, fire, and ice and the evil soul remnant. But Nie Tian couldn't do that, because it was against the rules of the Evil Edge Sword Conference. If it was a normal fight, Nie Tian could let Sakura come out. But this was a competition, and Sakura was another person. He couldn't interfere. Among the 9 superbs, there was not only Sakura, but also Jinin. But Jinin wasn't strong enough now. Even if he came out, he couldn't block wind, fire, and ice's sword. At this moment, there was only one way for Nie Tian, and that was to release his primordial spirit, the 9 superbs Chaos Beast. The 9 superbs Chaos Beast was Nie Tian's last trump card. His 9 dragon veins were injured, and even if he used them, he wouldn't be able to unleash his full strength. As such, he could only use his Yuan spirit. Originally, Nie Tian had not intended to use his primordial spirit. This was because the 9th extreme Chaos Beast was too powerful. Once he released it, it would definitely cause a huge commotion. But now he had to use it. Little 9, come out. With this thought in mind, the corners of Nie Tian's mouth moved slightly. Soon after, circular scarlet-red halos were released from his body, spreading in all directions in the void. Roar! In the next moment, a 1,000-meter-long crimson beast appeared behind Nie Tian. It let out a furious roar, and its terrifying aura shook the heavens and earth. This is... The moment the 9th extreme Chaos Beast appeared, everyone's eyes widened, and they all sucked in a breath of cold air. They could feel their souls trembling. The 9th extreme Chaos Beast was too terrifying. It stood tall in the sky like a peerless emperor, ruling over a piece of heaven and earth. The 9th extreme Chaos Beast was like a dictator, its fiery eyes sweeping across everything, looking down on everything. Boom! At this time, the Wind, Fire, Ice Great's sword landed directly on the 9th extreme Chaos Beast. However, the sword shadow collapsed directly, and it did not cause any damage to the 9th extreme Chaos Beast at all. The Wind, Fire, Ice Great was forced back thousands of meters by the impact. After he stabilized himself, he looked at the Crimson Beast in a daze. He did not dare to believe the scene in front of him at all. He could not believe that Nye would actually release his primordial spirit at this time. The primordial spirit was an existence that was almost like a burden to a god-state martial artist. However, in the hands of Nye, it could actually be so strong. Nye moved his body and stepped on the head of the ninth extreme chaos beast. He looked at the wind, fire, ice great and the remnant of the evil soul with a cold, murderous look. At this time, everyone present was in an uproar. Their trembling eyes showed how shocked they were. Who would have thought that Nyetion's biggest trump card was the primordial spirit? It was simply unimaginable that a martial artist's primordial spirit could be so terrifying. On the viewing platform high above, Gongsun Xingji, Guiwu Kwangsha, Jiang Lai, Nangang Duxiu, Xian Zongfeng, and the other martial artists were all staring blankly. No words could express the shock in their hearts. Nye was really different. Every time he was in the most dangerous situation, he would always surprise everyone. The appearance of the ninth extreme chaos beast could only be described as shocking. Your primordial spirit, how can it be so strong? The wind, fire, ice great was extremely shocked, and his voice was trembling. Nye Tianling smiled coldly. He did not say anything. Instead, he used his actions to answer. Nye Tian took a step forward, and the huge body of the ninth extreme chaos beast began to run wildly. Suddenly, heaven and earth shook, and the void trembled. The wind, fire, ice great, and the remnant of the evil soul felt the strong aura coming towards them. Their faces instantly became filled with fear. Immediately, they attacked at the same time. Two frightening sword shadows flew towards the ninth extreme chaos beast. The ninth extreme chaos beast was like a burning mountain. It was not afraid at all. It rushed forward, and the two sword shadows were actually shattered by the impact. The ninth extreme chaos beast body was extremely strong. Previously, when Nye fought the former president of the Holy Parliament, Bu Wu Qinxiu, this was proven. It seemed like after the ninth extreme chaos beast absorbed the power of chaos, its body became stronger and stronger. Nye estimated that the ninth extreme chaos beast could now fight with a peak stage supreme god. It was precisely because the ninth extreme chaos beast was too shocking that Nye would not release it unless it was a life and death situation. The wind, fire, ice great, and the remnant of the evil soul saw this scene in front of them. Only then did they realize the strength of the ninth extreme chaos beast. Immediately, their figures moved, and they retreated frantically. Trying to escape? Nye Tianling laughed. The ninth extreme chaos beast immediately spread its scarlet red wings, and it looked like two rays of sunset light were falling. Roar! The ninth extreme chaos beast roared angrily. Its wings shook, and like a huge ball of flames, it rushed forward crazily. The wind, fire, ice great, and the remnant of the evil soul did not expect that not only was the ninth extreme chaos beast body strong, but its speed was also extremely fast. They immediately screamed, and their faces turned pale. Unfortunately, it was already too late. The ninth extreme chaos beast waved its huge claws, and instantly, two scarlet red lights appeared like pillars of fire and shot out. Bam! Bam! Two muffled sounds rang out almost at the same time. The wind, fire, ice great, and the remnant of the evil soul were directly sent flying, leaving two bloody trails in the air. Following that, an even more shocking scene appeared. In midair, the remnant of the evil soul's body suddenly trembled, and it actually directly exploded, collapsing into a pool of blood. Dead. The remnant of the evil soul was dead. The ninth extreme chaos beast had only used one palm, and the remnant of the evil soul had died tragically on the spot. The remnant of the evil soul, the leader of the 13 reverse scale thorns, would have never dreamed that he would actually be killed by a palm of the ninth extreme chaos beast. When Nye saw this scene, he could not help but narrow his eyes. He could not help but feel a little strange. It seemed like the martial body of the remnant of the evil soul was much weaker than he had imagined. On the other side, the wind, fire, ice great whose entire body was dripping with blood, struggled to stand in midair. His face was beyond shocked, and he was looking at Nie Tian in disbelief. Chapter 2015. Nie Tian stared blankly for a few seconds before coming back to his senses. Then, he looked at the Wind, Fire, Ice Grand Elder. He only had 3 opponents. Songlan had no more strength to fight, and the Evil Soul Remnant had died mysteriously. Now, only Wind, Fire, Ice Great was left. The reason why the Evil Soul Remnant had died mysteriously was because Nie Tian felt that the former's martial body should not be so weak. He had actually been killed by the 9th Extreme Chaos Beast with 1 slap. However, he did not have time to think too much. He still had an enemy that he had not finished off. Wind, Fire, Ice Great had suffered a slap from the 9th Extreme Chaos Beast. He was injured, but it was not fatal. He still had the strength to fight. At this moment, Wind, Fire, Ice Great was looking at Nie Tian in horror. The shock in his heart was revealed on his face. He had never imagined that Nie Tian's primordial spirit was so strong. Not only him, but the others were also shocked by the scene in front of them. The primordial spirit that was originally abandoned by a God-state martial artist had actually become such a strong monster in Nie Tian's body. Who exactly was Nie Tian? Why did he have so many unimaginable things on him? Wind, Fire, Ice Great. You have 1 chance to admit defeat. Nie Tian took a step forward and landed on the 9th Extreme Chaos Beast. He stared at Wind, Fire, Ice Great with murderous eyes. Wind, Fire, Ice Great wanted to kill Nie Tian and even share. Originally, based on Nie Tian's character, he would definitely not hesitate to kill this person. However, he was willing to give Wind, Fire, Ice Great a chance to admit defeat. It was considered giving face to Guiwu Quang Sha. Thinking about it, Wind, Fire, Ice Great was Guiwu Quang Sha's grand disciple. With this layer of relationship, Nie Tian would only suppress his killing intent. However, if Wind, Fire, Ice Great did not appreciate it, then he could not blame Nie Tian. Wind, Fire, Ice Great's eyes trembled. He hesitated for a moment and finally spat out 3 words. I admit defeat. Although he still had a certain amount of combat strength, his strength was too weak in front of the 9th Extreme Chaos Beast. The Wind, Fire, Ice Great Beast had seen and experienced the might of a 9th level Chaos Beast with his own eyes. The Evil Soul Remnant that had died tragically just now was an example. He did not want to be the second Evil Soul Remnant. Wind, Fire, Ice Greatness, you're not that stupid. Nie Tian's mouth twitched a little when he heard Wind, Fire, Ice Great admit defeat. He said in a cold tone. Then, he turned at Songlan and asked cold, "What about you?" Songlan steadied himself. His face instantly turned pale. He spat out 2 words with difficulty. I admit defeat. With Songlan's current strength, he couldn't even defeat Xianyuan Yinsong. How could he fight against Nie Tian? No matter how unwilling he was, he didn't dare to make an enemy out of Nie Tian. The fact that Nie Tian had given him a chance to admit defeat was already a great mercy. Songlan dodged to the side and looked at Nie Tian in horror. His eyes were filled with fear and dread. Before the real battle with Nie Tian, he had always thought that the latter was a piece of trash that could be killed at will. But now, he finally understood that Nie Tian's strength had far surpassed his understanding of martial arts. Cher also broke free from the sword while Ice Wall's control at this time. She looked at Nie Tian with some doubt, but didn't say anything. Wind, Fire, Ice Majestic, and Songlan directly admitted defeat. This caused the crowd to be stunned, and their faces were incomparably astonished. No one had expected that this battle royale of the top 8 would have such an ending. Since Wind, Fire, Ice, and Songlan admitted defeat, it was basically confirmed that Nie Tian would be the sword champion of this evil edge sword duel. Cher and Xianyuan Yinsong were on Nie Tian's side, so of course they wouldn't fight with Nie Tian for the position of sword chief. No one could accept such a dramatic result for a while. At this time, Nie Tian took a step forward and stood at the center of the sword field. He raised his head to look at the viewing platform in the sky and said loudly, Divine Swordmaster, it's time to announce the results of the battle royale of the top 8. Gongsun Shengji's eyes trembled, and only then did he react. His face was filled with ecstasy. The scene that just happened was like a dream to him, and he still couldn't react until now. Gongsun Xingji's figure moved and appeared in front of the crowd. He glanced at Cher and the others, and said loudly, "Shuling, Xinyuan Yunsong, if the two of you have no objections, the sword champion of this evil-edged sword duel will be Nie Tian's." "Yes." Cher nodded. She had no intention of fighting with Nie Tian for the position of sword chief. She participated in the evil-edged sword duel for another matter. "I have no objections." Xinyuan Yunsong naturally had no objections. At this moment, he already understood the gap between him and Nie Tian. "Very well." Gongsun Xingji laughed loudly and said, "In that case, I, as the divine sword master of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, will announce that the sword champion of this evil-edged sword duel is Nya." Wait. Just as Gongsun Xingji was about to finish his last word, a cold voice interrupted him. Gongsun Xingji's face darkened. He turned around and saw that the person who stopped him was none other than Jiang Lai. He frowned and asked coldly, "Alliance Master Jiang, what do you mean by this?" Gongsun Xingji didn't know what grudges there were between Jiang Lai and Nie Tian, but he could tell that Jiang Lai had been targeting Nie Tian ever since he showed up. He was even trying to kill Nie Tian. He wasn't an idiot. He had already guessed that Jiang Lai had come to the evil-edged sword duel because of Nie Tian. "Brother Gongsun, before you announce the sword champion, I have some questions to ask you." Jiang Lai's lips curled up into an evil smile. "Is the evil-edged sword duel a competition between swordsmen?" Gongsun Xingji was surprised. He didn't know what Jiang Lai was up to, but he still nodded and said, "The evil-edged sword duel is a grand gathering of swordsmen. Every swordsman in the 9 realms knows that." At this time, Nie Tian also frowned, a faint trace of worry growing in his heart. "That's right." Jiang Lai smiled again and said, "Since the evil-edged sword duel is a contest between swordsmen, if one person defeats the others, but he doesn't use his cultivation in the way of the sword, but some other power, is that appropriate?" Gongsun Xingji frowned even more. How could he not tell that the person Jiang Lai was talking about was Nie Tian? "Alliance head Jiang, just say what you want to say. Don't beat around the bush," Gongsun Xingji said coldly. He didn't want to waste time with Jiang Lai. "Divine Sword Master, what I want to say is that Nie Tian didn't use his swordsman's power to defeat Windfire, Ice, and the others. He used some other power. Since the evil-edged sword duel is a grand gathering of swordsmen, it naturally has to focus on swordsman's strength. Since Nie Tian didn't use his swordsman's power, what right does he have to be the sword champion? What qualifications does he have to be the sword leader?" Jiang Lai's face instantly darkened as his powerful voice resounded in everyone's ears. Gongsun Xingji and Nie Tian stilled at the same time. They finally understood that Jiang Lai was questioning Nie Tian's qualifications to be the sword champion. There was no doubt that Nie Tian had not used his swordsman's strength to defeat Windfire, Ice, and the others. But was it reasonable to deny Nie Tian's qualifications to be the sword champion just because of this? Of course, such a statement was unreasonable. Chapter 2016. Jiang Lai's questioning of Nie Tian's qualification to be the sword chieftain caused the atmosphere to fall into a deathly, stifling silence. Everyone held their breaths and did not speak. Their eyes flickered as though they were waiting for a great show to begin. Everyone had thought that the Evil Peak sword duel would end after the quarterfinals. But now, it seemed like the real show was just about to begin. Jiang Lai's words sounded awkward, but if one thought about it carefully, it seemed to make some sense. A duel between swordsmen naturally had to focus on the strength of the sword Dao. But most people knew that Jiang Lai was questioning Nie Tian's qualifications because he did not want to hand over the inked Jade Dragon Sword. But Jiang Lai's status was special. He was the alliance master of the Xingtian Alliance. Everyone had to consider his words carefully. Although everyone felt disdain for Jiang Lai's actions, they did not dare to show it or say it. Gongsun Sheng's expression turned ugly after hearing Jiang Lai's words. He had never imagined that the alliance master, a peak expert of the 9 major domains, would be so shameless. After thinking for a moment, Gongsun Sheng said, Alliance Master Jiang, do you think that just because Nie Tian used the power of his primordial spirit, he cannot obtain the position of Sword Chief? Yes. Jiang Lai nodded and replied loudly. His attitude instantly became unyielding. This president feels that Alliance Master Jiang's words are very reasonable. How can a martial artist who uses other powers to defeat his opponent be worthy of the position of Sword Chief? Another voice sounded at this time. It was none other than the Holy Assembly's vice president, Nangong Duxiu. Everyone was stunned. They did not expect Nangong Duxiu to stand up for Jiang Lai at this time. Jiang Lai and Nangong Duxiu, the two people with the highest status here, stood up at the same time to question Nie Tian. This made the atmosphere even more strange. Everyone knew that these two were deliberately making things difficult, but no one dared to stand up and say anything. You! Gong Sun Sheng was stunned. His gaze swept across Jiang Lai and Nangong Duxiu. He had a gloomy expression and was speechless. Ha ha, impressive. At this moment, Nie Tian suddenly burst into laughter and said in a loud voice, "One is the sect master of the Xingtian Alliance, and the other is the vice president of the Holy Parliament. I can't believe that two people with such high statuses can be so shameless." Shameless. Nie Tian was not polite at all. He openly insulted Jiang Lai and Duxiu in public. Since the two of them had already gone this far, Nie Tian naturally couldn't endure it any longer. Stinking brat. Pay attention to who you're talking to. Jiang Lai's face sank after being called shameless by Nie Tian in front of everyone. He spoke in a cold tone. However, he still maintained his dignity and did not attack directly. Brat, do you know that the word shameless you just said is enough for you to die 100 times? Nangong Duxiu became even more furious and directly threatened Nie Tian. Nie Tian wasn't afraid in the slightest in the face of the two experts' threats. He smiled coldly and said, "Sirs, you dare to do shameless things, but don't dare to bear the reputation of being shameless." Jiang Lai frowned and said in a cold voice, "Kid from the Nie clan, don't think that I won't dare to kill you. If you think I'm shameless, then just say it." "All right." Nie Tian faintly smiled, and his gaze swept across everyone. He said, "As Alliance Master Jiang said, the Evil Peak Sword Seminar is indeed a grand meeting of the sword path. However, all the participating swordsmen are using their martial power. I believe that everyone can clearly see that many of the participants are even using their bloodline power. The strength of the sword path is originally supported by the cultivation of the martial path. Does using my Yuan spirit mean that I'm not a swordsman? If that's the case, then I suggest that all the swordsmen cripple their own martial power and be a pure swordsman with peace of mind. Only then will you be qualified to take the title of Sword Chief." As soon as Nie Tian's words fell, the crowd became restless. Nie Tian is right. The Evil Peak Sword Seminar is a grand meeting of the sword path, but has never prohibited swordsmen from using other powers. That's right. The Evil Peak Sword Seminar has always been a grand meeting of the sword path. Why can't a swordsman become a sword chief if he uses his Yuan spirit? There must be someone with ulterior motives who doesn't want Nie Tian to become the sword chief. Finally, someone couldn't help but start whispering to each other. Jiang Lai's expression instantly turned gloomy when he heard the crowd's discussion. He glared at Nie Tian and said in a cold voice, "Brat, you are twisting words and forcing logic." "Yes," Nangong Duxiu echoed. "Little bastard, no matter how glib your tongue is, don't even think about becoming the sword chief today." Nie Tian looked at the two's auras and saw that they were about to fight. He couldn't help but smile cold and say, "From the looks of it, are you too desperate? You're courting death." Jiang Lai's eyes turned cold. He could no longer suppress the anger in his heart. With a roar, his aura surged and turned into a massive pressure that pressed down on Nie Tian. Nie Tian's eyes trembled. He didn't expect Jiang Lai to be so shameless to attack him in front of so many people. He had used up a lot of his energy and couldn't withstand Jiang Lai's pressure. The vast pressure covered the sky and the earth. The terrifying aura crushed everything. "Stop!" At that critical moment, a voice rang out. Shortly after, A terrifying sword aura appeared and blocked the terrifying pressure in the air. Gongsun Xingji appeared next to Nie Tian and stared at Jiang Lai coldly. He said in a deep voice, "Alliance Master Jiang, you're going too far." "So what if I am?" Jiang Lai was startled and said with a gloomy face, "Gongsun Xingji, are you going to make an enemy out of me?" A threat, a naked threat. Gongsun Xingji's expression changed. He didn't expect Jiang Lai to be this arrogant. His eyes darkened as he said, "Alliance Master Jiang, whether or not Nie Tian is qualified to be the sword chief is my divine martial sword pagoda's business. It has nothing to do with you. I hereby announce that Nie Tian is the sword chief of this year's Evil Peak Sword Competition." Jiang Lai's eyes trembled as he released a murderous aura. He growled in a deep voice, "Gongsun Xingji, I will ask you again. Are you going to make an enemy out of me?" Everyone felt Jiang Lai's murderous aura. They couldn't help but tremble, and their eyes became heated. It seemed like Jiang Lai was really going to turn against him. Jiang Lai and Gongsun Xingji were the top cultivators in the 9 territories and the #1 swordsman in the 9 territories. If these two were to fight, it would be a great show. Gongsun Xingji was also furious. He shouted, "Jiang Lai, I, Gongsun Xingji, want to make an enemy out of you. What can you do?" His domineering voice resounded in the sky, displaying Gongsun Xingji's anger. Since Jiang Lai was being so aggressive, Gongsun Xingji had to fight with his life on the line. "Good, very good." Jiang Lai was stunned at first. Then, he smirked and said coldly, "It seems like I will have to kill today.